Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Savita Pandey and I'm the incoming Executive Director of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. This is Global Center's 13th year hosting the annual Ministerial Meeting on the Responsibility to Protect on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. This year, we are honored to co-host this meeting with the governments of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark. Excellencies, as you know, women and girls are uniquely affected and targeted in many conflict situations where atrocities are being perpetrated around the world. In Ethiopia, for example, parties to the conflict in Tigray have systematically raped and abused women and girls, traumatizing survivors and destabilizing entire communities. In Afghanistan, fears have intensified about a return to Taliban rule and the reimposition of past practices that violated the universal human rights of women, girls, and religious minorities. Excellencies, these are just two examples where systematic gender-based targeting, discrimination, and inequality have contributed to the risk of atrocity crimes. Although it is important to recognize the unique vulnerabilities of women and girls, we also must recognize them as agents of change, struggling and fighting to protect their basic human rights and to fight for a just society for all. It is no surprise that women have featured prominently in recent photos for mass protests from around the world. And despite grave personal danger, we have watched in awe as footage has emerged of Afghan women protesting directly in front of heavily armed Taliban fighters. Today's meeting, which highlights the interconnectedness of the women, peace and security and R2P agendas, offers an opportunity to discuss how we can better support women's expertise and women's voices in atrocity prevention. And this includes their full and equal participation in everything from high-level political negotiations to community-based engagement during peacekeeping operations to the value and inclusiveness of their voices in justice and accountability mechanisms. Peace is possible when the processes that lead to it are inclusive and representative of the whole of society. To share more on how we can achieve this, it is my great honor to welcome and give the floor to the Special Advisor of the UN Secretary General on the Prevention of Genocide, Ms. Alice Nedurdu. Her office laid the groundwork for exploring the links between WPS and R2P in last year's Secretary General's report on the responsibility to protect, entitled Prioritizing Prevention and Strengthening Response, Women and the Responsibility to Protect. Alice, welcome, and the floor is yours. I think we are having some difficulties.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Savita, for this welcome. And I would like to begin by saying, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, that I thank the permanent missions of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark. I also want to thank you, the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, for organizing this meeting and therefore putting back on the front banner the UN Secretary General's 2020 report on the responsibility to protect that explored linkages between upholding R2P and the commitment of states to advancing the women, peace and security agenda, as well as the gender dimension of mass atrocities. 2020 marked several important milestones, including 15 years since all heads of state and department unanimously adopted the responsibility to protect populations from atrocity crimes, 20 years since the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, 25 years since world leaders made a promise in Beijing on equal rights and opportunities for all women and girls everywhere. Last but not least, 2020 marked the 75th anniversary of the United Nations itself. These anniversaries remind us why it is critical to expand our efforts to support women and girls across the world and connect gender equality with many other global agendas, including the one that is pertinent to the work of my office, namely to advance efforts to protect populations from the most serious crimes: genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. We know that such crimes have a strong gender dimension and often constitute an extreme manifestation of patriarchal power dynamics in our societies. A few examples: in Rwanda, during the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, in which moderate Hutus and others were also killed, women were the target of propaganda, hate speech, incitement to violence, and gender-based atrocities. In Iraq, the despicable violence committed by Daesh, which has all the signs of the crime of genocide and other atrocity crimes, had a clear gendered impact. In Myanmar, grave violations, including sexual violence, were committed against Rohingya women during the 2017 events that resulted in mass killings of unknown number of civilians and the forced displacement of over 750,000 people. In Syria, parties in conflict have inflicted thousands of women and girls with sexual and gender-based violence. True commitment to preventing atrocity crimes means advancing the protection and promotion of women's equal rights, meaningful participation, and leadership globally. Everywhere, women are worse off than men, simply because they are women. Ethnic minorities, migrant and refugee women, those with disabilities face even greater barriers. Discrimination, hate speech, and xenophobia is on the rise across the world, often affecting women in a disproportionate way. In his 2020 report on the responsibility to protect, the Secretary General outlined gender equality and women's equal and meaningful participation as essential to the prevention of atrocity crimes. My office co-hosted a virtual side event during the 65th Commission on the Status of Women, CSW, for high-level and grassroots women peace builders. They included Ms. YY No, a young peace and women's rights activist who is with us today. YY's highly commendable work continues to empower and advocate for the rights of the Rohingya women and other ethnic women minorities in Myanmar. The last time YY and I were together was a few years ago in the Philippines, where we were engaged in a worldwide project mapping extremism. And in the Philippines, we were in, among other places, Cotabato and Zamboanga. So gender-based inequality and discrimination are risk factors that can potentially lead to the commission of atrocity crimes. This calls for the urgent need to address inequality and discrimination and enhance the promotion and protection of women's equal rights. Gender equality is not only a prerequisite for a better world, it is a prerequisite for the effective prevention of atrocity crimes. I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina in June this year and had the opportunity to meet with the mothers of Srebrenica. I promised them that I would carry their voices everywhere, particularly on denouncing genocide denial. I also attended a theater play, Yellow Boots, performed by young artists, addressing the struggle against stigmatization of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. These young artists, children of survivors of wartime crimes, shared that theater had allowed them to deal with social stigma and prejudices and overcome trauma. Theater helps to break the silence and talk about the topic in an empathetic way with solidarity and support for the survivors. It is of utmost importance that initiatives like this are supported and promoted. In the Middle East and North Africa region, my office has supported the creation of a regional working group of women peace builders with a focus on capacity building, information sharing, and coordination on atrocity crimes prevention. We intend to replicate this work in other regions and would welcome any support to this end. While there are many stories and remarkable examples of women dedicated to atrocity prevention, women continue to face significant challenges. We cannot push for women's equal participation and leadership without also making visible the threats and challenges women face when they fulfill these roles. As an international community, we do have a responsibility to better integrate the perspectives and voices of women in communities into all policy discussions focused on prevention and protection. And it is also critical to help expand the influence of women in the political sphere. We can do this by helping connect pioneering women political leaders with young female agents of change and community champions who are excluded from the political arena in their countries. Distinguished guests, as I come to an end of my remarks, I would like to reiterate that women's equal leadership and participation are fundamental for atrocity prevention. Conversely, full involvement of women leaders and decision makers leads to more lasting and sustainable peace, which is a direct contributor to atrocity prevention. In the past, I mediated many peace agreements, often in most cases as the only woman in the room. With the right background and the knowledge and skills, parties to the conflict focus on my primary identity as that of being a mediator of armed conflict. I was also heavily engaged in initiatives to grow evidence demonstrating that women's meaningful inclusion and leadership are integral components of building sustainable and peaceful societies. To prevent atrocities, not only must we find and support women in decision-making positions, but we must also build the knowledge and skills they need to succeed. So therefore, we must keep engaging the diplomatic, security, and development communities on ways current events, ongoing policy debates, key concepts and theories, analyzing of data and assertions, and review of major frameworks and tools unpack the diverse ways that women can be strengthened to reflect the complexity of women's experiences and perspectives in atrocity prevention. As the special advisor to the Secretary General on the prevention of genocide, I have made it a priority to strengthen the development of a gendered perspective to the prevention of atrocity crimes for one simple reason: effective prevention cannot happen without women. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you so much for those really powerful remarks. I now have the honor of introducing Ms. Y.Y. No. Y.Y. is a former political prisoner and the founder and executive director of the Women Peace Network in Myanmar. She also co-founded Justice for Women in Yangon and was recently a fellow of the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. She has been recognized as a champion of prevention by the UN's Office of Prevention of Genocide and the Responsibility to Protect. Y.Y., you're so welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Savitha and Ms. Alice. Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, I am very honored to have the opportunity to speak today. I would like to commend the member states, the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, as well as other international actors for their commitment to R2P. Today, it is more important than ever to reassess the status of R2P. Its framework is far from complete. As we speak, atrocity crimes continue to be perpetrated with impunity across the world. Vulnerable populations, especially ethnic and religious minorities, are being targeted in many ways. Women and girls in particular are being subjected to sexual and gender-based violence, as well as many other brutal acts. In these situations, women are the first responders in preventing atrocities. They often use available resources to take prompt actions in these settings. Such has been the case in Myanmar. In 2012, when the violence broke out against Rohingya, I had been just released from 7 years in prison as a political prisoner. And as a member of Rohingya community, I couldn't just sit back and watch what was happening to my people. Using my freedom, I founded Women's Peace Network with the goal to prevent further atrocities and promote peace in Myanmar. When the Myanmar military committed genocide in 2016 and 2017, we documented and raised awareness about this and other atrocity crimes. Through our work, we urge international community to protect the Rohingya people. Indeed, many of us, women's groups and members of civil society, have been doing everything to prevent atrocity crimes despite facing threat and intimidations. In conflict area, women civil society leaders have been risking their life to build peace and security for a safer and just world. Yet our role today makes us question whether the international community is as committed to our cause as we are. This is because time and time again, the international community has failed to follow our warning with concerted actions. And to us, what is happening in Myanmar today is the result of these failures. In fact, this February, Myanmar military used its decades-long impunity to stage a coup and terrorize the entire nations. For over 7 months, the junta has been intensifying its practices of murder, arbitrary arrest, torture, and enforced disappearance against entire populations, and including children and peaceful protesters. Nationwide, military is wielding heavy artillery and launching airstrikes against the civilians and committing sexual violence against young women. Now the people are left with no choice but to defend themselves. What's happening in Myanmar today could have been prevented if the R2P framework had been enforced decades ago. Therefore, today I urge international community to listen to us and take actions. First, we must begin by recognizing atrocity crimes. Many countries, including the United States, have yet to recognize such crimes, including the genocide against Rohingya. We need to recognize the problem as it is to find its solutions. Second, international community must use the UN framework for analysis for atrocity crimes and other tools available as early as possible, and help hold the perpetrators of these heinous crimes accountable under R2P. Third, implement the WPS agenda and ensure meaningful participations of women in all processes. And it is crucial that women of diverse backgrounds, including ethnic and religious minorities, are represented. Lastly, I urge you to provide direct support to the affected communities, local civil society organizations, and women's groups. Unless the world acts as one, our future generations will know only war and never peace. You failed the Rohingya, now you are failing the entire populations in Myanmar. It is up to you to act. You cannot fail us again. Thank you.
Thank you, Wainu, for those very, very powerful words. And I hope that through this platform, we are able to urge member states to take timely action. Before I give the floor to our esteemed co-host and our distinguished speakers, I would like to mention a couple of housekeeping matters. This is the second annual R2P Ministerial Meeting that is open to the public. It is also being recorded and will be posted on our website after the meeting is over. If you're following us on Twitter, you can use hashtags R2P Ministerial and hashtag WPS. Also, a quick note to the speakers, as Jahan mentioned earlier, we will be communicating the speaking order via the Zoom chat function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Given the long list of speakers, I kindly ask you to limit your statements to 3 minutes. And now it is my honor to pass on the floor to our esteemed co-host. I would first like to call on His Excellency, Mr. Rodolfo Solano Quiros, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Savita, and good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, Alice, and good morning, Wainu, for your call to action you are making to us this morning. Today is a beautiful day and a great day. It's a beautiful day because we have the opportunity to meet again for a second time. But today is a great day because it's our opportunity to take concrete actions. Dear colleagues, excellencies, I am honored to join you today in this annual ministerial meeting. I would also like to reiterate Costa Rica's support of the Office of Prevention of Genocide and R2P. In particular, Costa Rica celebrates the office collaboration with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the Latin American Network for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention. Today, we have the opportunity to strengthen the principle of R2P by focusing our attention on existing gap, that is to integrating gender dimensions in its implementation. It has been recognized in reports of the Secretary General that gender inequality and discrimination can increase underlying risks of sexual and gender-based violence. Our responsibility to protect must be inclusive, and in other words, it must be consistent with the resolution 1325 of Women, Peace, and Security. I would therefore like to refer to three cross-cutting points that will help us close gaps and to further interrelate R2P with women, peace, and security. First, conflict prevention. This is a common pillar of both R2P and the WPS agendas. Conflict prevention represents a pivotal foundation for the protection of people and the protection of human rights. The engagement of all stakeholders, women's groups, non-governmental organizations, media, private sector, academia, and civil society contributes to building early warning mechanisms, foster collaborative approaches for the protection of rights, and empower actors committed to prevention of conflict and mass atrocities. If we expect to mobilize action and improve our prevention systems, we must proactively integrate all actors to positions where they can make the change. Women have proven to play a key role in conflict prevention. Human rights defenders, in particular, women and girls, have demonstrated to their ability to play a key role in all processes related to early warning and protection with their families and their communities. There must be a recognition that there exists a gendered impact with respect to conflict. Women and girls suffer disproportionately during conflict than men and boys. Sex disaggregated data is therefore essential in order to inform gender analysis and to develop appropriate evidence-based prevention policies and responses. Secondly, ending discrimination and empowering all women and girls who still suffer from reality of discrimination throughout the world. This contributes to their disproportionate suffering when conflict arises. Women and girls are not only victims of sexual and gender-based violence, but also used as a weapon of warfare. It is only through the rule of law and accountability for human rights violations, we will contribute to closing the gender gap and limit the unjust tensions that scale into mass atrocities, because discrimination and inequality are risk factors for these types of crimes. My dear friends, colleagues, by respecting their rights, including the right to live free from violence and discrimination, we empower women and girls their own voices. These voices must be heard in conflict prevention, during conflict, and in post-conflict situations. This takes me to my third and last point: the equal, full, and meaningful participation of women. Women must participate equally, fully, and meaningfully in decision-making processes regarding conflict prevention, conflict mediation, and conflict resolution. Despite their enormous contributions to the consolidation and sustainability of peace, in our current system, women continue to be overlooked for peacekeeping operations and are not fully included in peace processes. That is unacceptable. We should guarantee their meaningful participation and equal involvement as mentioned in the resolution 1325, but this requires national and international commitment. Commitments that we must honor with the women and girls of Afghanistan. And let me be clear about this. We must not remain silent when the new regime does not allow young girls to have an education. Educating girls today is the key to empower the leaders of tomorrow. My dear friends, colleagues, as the Secretary General mentioned in his report of women and the responsibility to protect, all UN member states means all of us must work to ensure that the obstacles that prevent women from fully participating in decision-making processes are removed. And please let me add, not as victims, but as survivors, not as placeholders, but as leaders and visionaries. Women and girls are half of the world's population that must have a seat and a voice at this table. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now it is my honor to give the floor to our second co-host, His Excellency, Mr. Gordon Grlić Radman, Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Croatia. Minister,
Thank you very much. And, so, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear Rodolfo, dear Jeppe, so I'm really grateful also to you to having organized this conference where we actually such as co-organizers. Yes, Rodolfo, indeed, you are right. It's a great day and seize the day. Let's have a good outcomes of our good results of our conference. So really, as you mentioned at the outset, our annual ministerial meeting on responsibility to protect comes at a critical time. During last decades, atrocity crimes have been on the rise. Syria, Yemen, and Ethiopia are just some tragic examples. We are witnessing pushbacks against human rights, especially those of women and girls, as demonstrated these days in Afghanistan. However, we are not giving up, just on the contrary. In May, we have adopted the UN General Assembly resolution deciding to place R2P permanently on the GA agenda with an overwhelming support. Furthermore, for the first time, we have mandated the Secretary General to provide reports guiding our R2P debates. Now, we have to put these powerful tools to the best possible use. We need R2P reports and GA debates that are more concrete and action-oriented. We need to analyze atrocity, crime threats, and efficiency of our responses in individual country situations. It is quite clear that we need to protect women and girls better. We need to move towards practical actions that will bring women and girls in the center of atrocity crimes protection in real life. Only by addressing challenges in individual country situation and by analyzing our successes and our failures can we learn from experience and address gendered impact of the atrocity crimes. Let me give a couple of concrete examples. First, a well-known International Peace Institute study measured the presence of women as negotiators and mediators, finding that when women participate, peace agreements are 20% more likely to last at least 2 years and 35% more likely to last for 15 years. Second, in Lebanon, in the aftermath of Beirut port explosion, women played a leading role in de-escalating tensions and ensuring non-violent protests. Third, however, peace efforts in 2020 have struggled to include women. For example, women represented only around 10% of negotiators in the Afghan talks, just 20% of negotiators in Libya's political discussions, and 0% of negotiators in Libya's military talks and Yemen's recent process. One current peace process was led by a woman chief mediator, making the first time in 6 years that a woman held this role. Fourth, despite their low representation, women leaders in peacekeeping contexts have risen against all odds and reframed their peace-building roles to adapt to the challenges and realities posed by the pandemic. In DRC, the peacekeeping mission, MONUSCO, supported women leaders from 5 ethnic groups to promote unity and call for ending of the conflict. The UN, member states, and NGOs have a lot to do to encourage and assist women in developing their role in post-conflict resolution and peace-building activities. we all should ensure that women play a key role in the design and implementation of post-conflict resolution and peace-building activities. Support and strengthen women's organizations in their peace-building efforts by providing adequate and sustained financial and technical support. And impunity and issue redress of crimes committed against women in violent conflict and informs and bring to justice those involved in rape as a war crime. Establish mechanisms for enforcing and monitoring international instruments for the protection of women's rights in post-conflict situations. My country, Croatia, can testify from its own experience that women not only bear a disproportionate burden during conflict, but that they also have a key role to play in preventing and ending wars, peace building, and post-conflict management. Therefore, Croatia remains firmly committed to advancing the WPS agenda. This is why we organized the high-level video conference on women's contribution to peace and security held in April this year under the Croatian presidency of the US Atrocity Charter. This event provided an opportunity to share lessons learned and best practices in order to address gaps and to advance the implementation of the WPS agenda in A5 countries and beyond. I'm looking forward to hearing your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And now it is my honor to call upon our third co-host, His Excellency, Mr. Jeppe Kofod, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Denmark.
Well, thank you so much, Savita, and let me start by thanking my co-host and colleagues, Minister Kiros, Minister Gordon. Good to see you also, both of you. I also want to thank the Special Advisor, Inderito, for her keynote address, and also, of course, Minu for her very inspiring speech. Thank you so much for that. Also, a special thanks to the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect for their excellent work on this event. With today's ministerial, we wish to highlight the role of girls and women in prevention of mass atrocities. As a co-chair of a group of friends of R2P in New York, we place great importance on this topic and welcome this timely discussion. Today's discussion takes place in the midst of a serious developments in some countries. Consider, for example, the reports of sexual and gender-based violence in the ongoing armed conflict in Tigray, or the brave girls and women who have taken to Afghan streets to protest violations of their rights at the hand of the Taliban. This session is about highlighting what girls and women already do and about what we must do to prevent new atrocities against girls and women. This call to action was also the motivation when we all adopted the responsibility to protect in 2005, a commitment not to look the other way, not to leave it to the individual women and girls to stand alone against cruelty. To implement this responsibility, we must recognize that atrocity crimes do not appear out of the blue. Atrocity crimes begin with human rights violations. This is why we in today's session highlight the importance of achieving gender equality, also as a means of atrocity prevention, allowing women and girls to act as agents of prevention and protection. The responsibility to take these steps rests with states at home, but also at the UN. We can, should, and must make a difference. Too often, however, we witness a divided and inactive Security Council. In this vacuum, the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council have an important role in identifying, preventing, and responding to atrocity crimes. The establishment of accountability mechanism for Syria and Myanmar are excellent examples. As member of the Human Rights Council, Denmark works tirelessly to put prevention on the agenda. We thus welcome the Council's intercessional on the responsibility to protect earlier this year and look forward to deepening this engagement. As states, we should also accept that prevention starts at home. We must all do our utmost to mitigate risks such as the increased violence, sexual violence. Denmark has highlighted the need to prevent and react to sexual and gender-based violence, both internationally and at home, in its newest National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. Accountability is key to addressing and preventing conflict-related sexual violence. Sadly, the number of people in the world displaced by conflict and atrocities is at its highest since the Second World War. And with the effect of COVID-19, that number is likely to increase as women and girls have been disproportionately hard hit by COVID-19. There has therefore never been a better time to focus on a shared responsibility. Some 75 years ago, Anne Frank wrote in her famous Diary of a Young Girl, how wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So we must act. We all share the responsibility to protect. I look forward to this meeting and to continue this important work with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister, for those powerful words. And I would like to thank all our three co-hosts for not only co-hosting this meeting, but for being a consistent champion of the responsibility to protect over the years. So I thank you very much. And now I would like to open the floor for our speakers. Our first speaker is Her Excellency, Ms. Marta Luisa Ramirez, Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs for Colombia. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Excellencies. It is my pleasure to thank and to highlight the efforts made by the governments of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, and the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect for organizing this ministerial meeting, bearing in mind the current situation of Afghan women and girls. I also would like to thank Savita Fund for her very warm welcome to all of us. In different regions and countries in the world, we are witnessing atrocity crimes that are being committed in an intolerable magnitude and brutality with no compliance to international human rights or humanitarian law guidelines. These crimes include deliberate attacks, sexual violence, the denial of humanitarian aid, migration, internal and international displacement, human trafficking, and extensive and systematic targeting on specific ethnic groups. These crimes can never be justified. We should not have this panorama because 20 years ago, we launched the Resolution 1325. So what is happening if we have this resolution? Your Excellencies, we agree with the Secretary General's view when he stated in the report that strengthening holistic atrocity prevention will only be possible if women participate equally and meaningfully in decision-making, conflict prevention and resolution, mediation, protection, transitional justice, reconciliation, and peace building and other political process. Quote, but let me add to the Secretary General statement that it will be possible only if women participate in the world economy, in the nation's economy, if women are included in the labor market, if women can be entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, and it needs a lot of decision, not only from the policymakers, but also from the multilateral institutions. The United Nations resolution of peace building was marked as a milestone in the recognition of the role of women. Nonetheless, further implementation is required to integrally achieve the purpose outlined in the Resolution 1325. And that's why I feel we need to show the serious political decision and the multilateral institutions' decision towards their equitable participation in efforts to maintain and to promote peace and security. Women, of course, can create dialogue. Women can create bridges in order to solve differences and to solve a conflict in our countries. But women must solve their own needs. This is clear nowadays more than ever. This is one of the reasons why I felt motivated to draft a letter about the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan addressed to the Security Council and the Secretary General in early September, which was supported for so many vice presidents, foreign ministers, and high representatives. Through this letter, we call on the international community to make all efforts to uphold the human rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, their right to have education, as my friend, the Minister Solano from Costa Rica has appointed. Education is a human right for men and women, but of course for women in Afghanistan. If they have their right to develop their own professional careers, if they have the right to develop them as human beings. So that's why we ask all countries to show solidarity with women in that country and to take all measures necessary to shelter all those Afghani women who are threatened and endangered by crossing the borders of their country. We ask the Security Council to urge all our forces in Afghanistan to commit to effectively protect the human rights of Afghan women. I am very pleased that our initiative has been echoed. The concern for the fate that awaits the women and girls of Afghanistan is real. If the Taliban regime returns to hindering of women's development and discriminatory practices that characterized them in the past, we will lose everything that has been achieved in the last 20 years in relation to the situation of women and girls. In this situation, because of the COVID-19, with all these negative consequences for the entire humanity, with the loss of human lives, with the impoverishment of so many nations, the entire world needs the benefit from women's capacities to create wealth and well-being, to participate in the economy in the entire world. The humanity needs the unique views and experiences of women on building peace and security as one of the more important issues that we have nowadays. If there is a case in which we must do everything to prove the international commitment, the political will is precisely to prevent atrocities, is in this case of Afghanistan. We have heard in the previous interventions about Syria, Yemen, Iraq, different countries, Myanmar, of course, but nowadays we have to have a voice for Afghan women. This is something which is not a political declaration. We have to act with precise so important, and I want to propose and to have a follow-up for the economic freedom of women in the entire world, the economic freedom and autonomy of women. And this is something that all the United Nations member states can build in order to show that there is this political will, not only for Afghan women, but also for women in the entire world. Excellencies, Colombia has achieved great experience in the implementation of Resolution 1325 as we move forward in the implementation of the final agreement signed with the guerrilla FARC. The lessons we have learned after more than 5 decades of internal conflict and the progress we are making on this path to achieve sustainable peace are already serving as a benchmark for addressing armed conflicts in the other regions of the world. Your Excellencies, we hope we can continue contributing to the development of this agenda, as well as to strengthening the participation and leadership of women in the construction of peace in the entire world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President, for those very powerful words. I would now like to invite the Honorable Ms. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of Namibia. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, moderator. First, I want to thank the government of Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and of course the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect for having organized this discussion. The link between the right to protect agenda and the women, peace and security agenda needs to be well understood for the role of women in conflict and their protection to be secured. The women, peace and security agenda is particularly special to Namibia. It's over 20 years. Namibia has not only introduced the discussions at the Security Council, by the resolution was adopted under Namibia's chairship. Looking at what is happening around us, the Women Peace Agenda is more relevant than ever before as we witness the effect conflict has on women and girls. At the same time, it's recorded that when women are participating in conflict resolution, peace is more sustained. Namibia, much like the rest of the world, is still battling with the COVID-19 pandemic. In these times, we are reminded of the importance of multilateralism as collective action to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic is a group assignment that must be executed. Throughout last year, which is 2020, the world has truly witnessed what is meant to pull in the same direction, notwithstanding the challenges that were, particularly when every country was forced to close their borders, an action that is unprecedented in the recent history. The border closure has a different impact in people in conflict areas, hence a need to amplify the women, peace and security agenda as various conflicts still rage in the face of the global pandemic, and we don't know how long it's going to take. Namibia is ready to take part in the discussions of the UN Secretary General 2020 report on the responsibility to protect. We believe the doctrine of responsibility to protect is an important one. However, over the years, we have witnessed that its implementation is a cause of concern. Hence, it's necessary for the link between it and the Women, Peace and Security agenda to be clearly clarified. Therefore, we believe the General Assembly should have the discussion on responsibility to protect, where all viewpoints of member states can be taken on board in order to ensure that the responsibility to protect the agenda is not used to drive external agenda, but truly to protect the people concerned in a specific area or a specific country. As an African country, what happened in Libya in 2011 is still fresh in our mind. As initiator of the discussion on women and peace, Namibia continued to be committed to the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and we are ready to play a leadership role. To solidify our commitment to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, we have opened an International Women Peace Center in Windhoek on the 31st of October 2020, as we celebrated the 20th anniversary of that resolution. The International Women Peace Center objective is a center of excellency which captures a unique niche of innovative distinction among institutions working with women, peace and security agenda worldwide by taking on the challenges of further conceptualization and operationalization the concept of women's influence in peace process. Furthermore, the International Women Peace Center's main function will be generally advocacy for the women, peace and security agenda on networking and partnership, and on capacity building and training. In this regard, Namibia commits to elevating women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the peace process. Women's meaningful participation in the peace process and humanitarian action is particularly important as it is at the center of the resolution 1325. For Namibia, some bold decisions over the years have been taken, and this included the introduction of the gender 50-50 representation at all levels within the SWAPO party, which is the ruling party in Namibia, which has resulted in women taking up 47% representation in our National Assembly. Similarly, due to the national policy on gender equality, we have seen the number of women increasing in the boardrooms. We are working on increasing the number of women in the security sector through the programs of the International Women Peace Center. For this to be realized, the Ministries of Defense and the Ministry responsible for police have both attached personnel to the International Women Peace Center. The protection and full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and girls during conflict and post-conflict situation is very crucial. And Namibia will continue to champion the Women, Peace, and Security agenda using the UN, the AU, and the SADC mechanism. Also, considering that Namibia is a troop contributing country to peacekeeping missions, we will work to ensure a good number of women participation at different levels in our contingents. Facilitators, finally, Namibia encourages all member states to support the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in order to realize the full potential of women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Jean Asselborn, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Luxembourg. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam. And I thank the Global Center for the responsibility to protect for organizing this year's session, as well as my colleagues from Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark for their opening statements. And thank you to the Special Advisor, Alice Neritou, and also Ms. YY Nu for your keynote statements and your lived experience of atrocity prevention. And concerning Mrs. YY Nu, I have a lot of respect really for your personal ordeal. When we last met, COVID-19 had been holding humanity in its grip for half a year. The Secretary General's global ceasefire call had unfortunately gone broadly unanswered. I raised the situation of the Rohingya in Myanmar, the Yazidi in Iraq and Syria, the Uyghur in China, all of them victims of ongoing genocidal campaigns. Their situation have hardly improved. Instead, political contexts almost everywhere have worsened in the last 12 months. In Afghanistan, 2 decades worth of stabilization policies and counterterrorism strategies seem to have failed. More than 200,000 lives have been lost. Over $1 trillion in aid have been invested, some believe in vain. Now, what is left? A generation of women and girls who have been empowered for 20 years and had the hope of achieving gender equality. Who is opposing the Taliban in the streets now? Question mark. These same women and girls. Their struggle plays out also on the streets from Belarus to Myanmar. It is the struggle of women to have had enough of being marginalized. This is where responsibility to protect and the women and peace and security agenda intersect a feminist peace. The women and girls of Afghanistan, of Belarus, Myanmar, Syria, Yemen, Xinjiang speak for themselves. But we owe it to them that we place the tools of multilateral system at the service of a feminist peace. In Afghanistan, UNAMA must continue to fulfill its important mandate with a strong human rights component. In addition, we encourage the Human Rights Council at its current session to create an independent mandate that can both monitor the human rights situation, especially the rights of women and girls, as well as of vulnerable groups, and make recommendations for its approval. In our view, the International Criminal Court has also to play his role. Feminist peace recognizes that there can be no peace without justice. That even if you seize power by force, you can't turn back the clock. So feminist peace opposes all forms of the patriarchal violence that is at the heart of genocide, of war crimes, and crimes against humanity. If you can be the glue that holds together the normative framework of responsibility to protect and women and peace and security. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And we are really heartened to hear that multiple ministers are echoing the plight of women and girls on the ground and sort of taking names and naming names. So that's heartening, and I hope that this leads to some concrete action. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Pedro Brolo Villa, Minister of Foreign Affairs for Guatemala. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for convening this virtual meeting to address an issue that Guatemala attaches great importance. Each state has the primary responsibility to protect its population and prevent atrocities such as those we have seen in the past and unfortunately still see today. The responsibility to protect is a precept supported by the fundamental objective of the Charter of the United Nations, which seeks to preserve present and future generations from the scourge of war and promote peace among people and nations. On that account, I would like to emphasize my country's support in two joint statements recently delivered in the Human Rights Council concerning the dire situation in Afghanistan. We are dismayed by the regression that has already occurred in terms of democracy and gender equality. We join the international call and urge all parties in Afghanistan to protect the human rights of women, adolescents, and girls in the country. My delegation reiterates the call to uphold obligations under international human rights law, as well as international humanitarian law and refugee law, since the component of protecting civilian population is intrinsically linked to them. Mr. President, I would like to highlight that in May of this year, Guatemala was an original co-sponsor and voted in favor of the adoption of the resolution entitled "The Responsibility to Protect and the Prevention of Genocide, War Crimes, Ethnic Cleansing, and Crimes Against Humanity." There is nothing more important that this was the first resolution of R2P adopted by the General Assembly since 2009, which guarantees the inclusion of an agenda items on this subject in the General Assembly's programming of work, and by extension, the presentation of an annual report by the Secretary General. In addition, I want to emphasize on the Secretary General's latest report, particularly Chapter 4 entitled Vital Roles of Women in Prevention and Protection. It is worth stressing the importance of women's contribution to early warning, peace operation, peaceful conflict resolutions, peace building, access to justice for all, due process, and effective accountability. In this regard, it is crucial to ensure the full and meaningful participation of women at all levels of national, regional, and international decision-making. Women are agents of change and play a facilitating role in dialogue process and reconciliation in societies. Guatemala is committed to a noble task of contribution to the United Nations peacekeeping operation and expanding the participation of female personnel. To date, more than 270 women have been deployed and more than 380 women have been trained in various national and international courses. To conclude, Guatemala reiterates the interdependence of the pillars of peace and security, development, and human rights. We recognize that the responsibility to protect complements the concept of sustaining peace, as it prioritizes the respect and observance of human rights based on a preventive approach to avoid confrontations. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for highlighting the interconnectedness of all of these different agendas. And now I would like to pass the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Dominique Hassler, Minister for Foreign Affairs, Education and Sport of Liechtenstein. Minister, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, Liechtenstein continues to be fully committed to the R2P norm. The crimes subsumed under R2P are the most harrowing expressions of brutality and disregard for human value and dignity. Liechtenstein was proud to be part of the core group that brought forward the Human Rights Council to mark the 15th anniversary of the responsibility to protect. It is deeply disappointing to reflect that 15 years into its existence, the R2P norm is yet to be operationalized on a regular basis. R2P can be implemented through a broad variety of measures, from diplomatic engagement to more vigorous action, including action taken by the UN Security Council. However, in situations from Myanmar to Yemen and elsewhere, the world has observed the Council's inability to live up to its mandate. It also deprives itself of basic tools of prevention, such as institutionalized briefings from relevant parts of the UN system, as well as civil society. This points to significant untapped potential for the Security Council to support Pillar 1 and 2 of the responsibility to protect. States must promote and make full use of the rule of law when mass atrocity crimes are committed, condoned, or incited. Criminal accountability for such acts is of paramount importance to break recurring cycles of violence and deter the commission of future crimes. The Rome Statute of the ICC has played a pioneering role in establishing a comprehensive and victim-centered framework to expansively and efficiently respond to conflict-related sexual violence crimes. For the first time in history, it firmly established conflict-related sexual and gender-based violence as crimes against humanity and war crimes. As we meet today, it is particularly urgent to remind those in power and ourselves of the responsibility to protect the women and girls of Afghanistan. The reports we are receiving are disturbing indeed, and we join those who have raised the issue in this meeting to call for the full enjoyment of all human rights by all women and girls in Afghanistan. This includes freedom of movement and full access to education, as well as their full and unhindered participation in decision-making processes. We see an essential role of the UN system in this effort and are fully committed to joining it. Ensuring women's participation is also critical in peacekeeping and reconstruction. The impact of the participation of women in armed forces on the respect of international humanitarian law is a relevant and largely unexplored dimension of this discussion. To this end, Liechtenstein has launched a research project on the interplay of the women, peace and security agenda and international humanitarian law together with Georgetown Institute of Women, Peace and Security. The findings of this research project will inform our efforts to increase compliance with IHL, and turn help to prevent the seeds of further conflict from being sown in the conduct of hostilities. Liechtenstein firmly believes that there can be no peace without justice, and no justice without peace. And there can be no justice without justice for all women, a conclusion also reached by the SG in his Common Agenda report. Structural inequality, discrimination, and poverty all too often hinder women's access to justice, including transitional justice processes. Upholding SDG 16 on peaceful, just, and inclusive societies is central to our long-term efforts to prevent future atrocities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for highlighting the role of justice in preventing future atrocities. I would now like to give the floor to the Honorable Mr. Arias Bartolo, Minister for European and Foreign Affairs of Minister. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, Malta thanks the permanent missions of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark to the United Nations and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing today's Ministerial Meeting on the responsibility to protect and the role of women and girls in atrocity prevention. Throughout history, women and girls have suffered disproportionately from war and conflict. Especially rape and sexual violence have been weaponized to weaken families and break down societies. Women and girls have also been excluded from conflict prevention and resolution efforts. Women can be powerful forces for peace building and reconciliation. Depriving girls and women of full participation in every area of life is also violence against them. During the pandemic, women in war zones have been facing new cases of rape and gang rape daily. Shame, isolation, and fear of rejection lead to underreporting. Impunity against sexual violence crimes hinders peace and stability. Programs to help the victims of war and conflict remain underfunded, while money to buy arms and fund military intervention continue to be found abundantly. The best way to help women in war and conflict zones is to work more to prevent war and conflict in the first place. One lesson to be hopefully learned from the painful experiences of short-sighted regime change military intervention, that they serve rather than help build nations and communities, make the situation worse, as most of the money and efforts go on the military action and very little is spent on building communities and securing peace and prosperity to enable people to live a decent life with dignity, peace, and justice. Malta is committed to the protection of women and girls while promoting gender equality and women's economic and political empowerment, as well as gender mainstreaming. Malta also promotes an increase in women's active participation in conflict resolution and peace processes, including disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, and the common security and defense policy. As a show of support to accelerate efforts to champion women's participation in peace processes, Malta has recently contributed towards the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund Rapid Response window, as well as to the UN Peace Building Fund, UN Women towards implementation of UN Women Afghanistan country office. We will continue to champion the Women, Peace and Security agenda as one of our national priorities and explore synergies with other issues should we be entrusted with the responsibility to serve on the Security Council 2023-2024. In conclusion, I wish to reiterate Malta's commitment to a security model which incorporates human rights as one of its core principles, and to underline that the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in all their diversity in peace processes is essential to achieve sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And now I would give the floor to Senator, the Honorable Ms. Marie Spain, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Women of Australia.
Australia commends the Global Centre for the Responsibility to Protect and the governments of Croatia, Costa Rica and Denmark for convening this important event. We thank the chairs and the speakers here today, including the United Nations Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention. Last year, I spoke about the new challenges generated for the multilateral system by the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we know the pandemic will continue to present great challenges to health and life globally for some time to come, and that R2P remains a critical tool in the UN Peace and Security Pillar. We are in this together. However, each of our societies differs in its range and depth of vulnerabilities and resilience. Too often, we're seeing how the secondary impacts of the pandemic can significantly heighten the risk of human rights violations and abuses for those most at risk, such as increased rates of violence against women and girls, increasing levels of tension expressed through racism, sexism, disinformation and hate speech, stigmatisation, incitement to violence, sexual and gender-based violence are all known drivers of mass atrocities. We are therefore reminded of our undertaking as individual states and as part of the collective international community to protect humanity from mass atrocity crimes. There are clear linkages between the promotion and protection of women's human rights and the prevention of atrocity crimes, as highlighted in the Secretary-General's report on R2P last year. We know that progress on gender equality supports atrocity prevention. A gender perspective and an intersectional approach is required to understand and adequately address the causes and dynamics of atrocity crimes and to help states to better meet their commitment to R2P. We urge states to address the links between the promotion of gender equality, conflict resolution and atrocity prevention, including through full implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Such action should include full, equal and meaningful participation and leadership of women in all processes related to early warning, the security sector, conflict resolution, peace operations and peace building, and justice and accountability. It is a timely reminder for all that sovereignty is not absolute. It's not a limitless right to hold up as a shield against scrutiny for violations of human rights and other fundamental international norms that we have collectively committed to uphold. Sovereignty is a responsibility, including the responsibility to protect our populations from mass atrocities. It is critical that our approaches to R2P and atrocity prevention integrate gender, addressing inequalities and empowering women and girls. They are essential as first responders and as agents for accountability, justice and peace. Thank you.
I would now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Jakub Kulhanek, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, women and girls play an irreplaceable and crucial role in preventing atrocities. It is that simple. I mean, we see it everywhere around us. It is often women that raise their voices to diffuse tensions in their communities. Women peacekeepers protect the vulnerable. Young girl activists advocate for a more hopeful tomorrow. Resolution after resolution, report after report, all confirm the positive role women and girls play in making our societies more equal and cohesive. Yet, women mediators and negotiators are underrepresented. in peace processes around the globe. Women hold only a fraction of decision-making positions. Female-led civil society organizations tend to be seriously underfunded. Clearly, there is disparity between what we know is effective and what we actually do to prevent atrocities that have no place in the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, we can carry on including gender into the UN Security Council mandates. We may insist on inclusion of gender provisions into peace agreements. But we need more complex changes to accomplish women's full, equal, and meaningful participation. In the context of the ongoing pandemic, I want to stress two key elements: education and protection. Well, let me be clear. Anything that prevents girls from meeting their educational goals and dreams is unacceptable. Only through education can they really realize their full potential and make a difference in their societies. And we know all too well that it is unfortunately not just the COVID-19 pandemic that raises barriers to girls' education. When it comes to the question of adequate protection, the picture is just as bleak. Female human rights defenders are disproportionately affected by both physical violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, and the hate speech. Well, needless to say, though, that from Belarus to Burma, women's courage and conviction endures even in instances where their safety is far from ensured. They lead the change all over the world, demanding the end of violence. Ladies and gentlemen, it troubles me to say that all too often we face a situation where protection fails. In such cases, accountability is our strongest instrument to prevent the cycle of violence. The Czech Republic is a fervent supporter of the International Criminal Court, which in its Rome Statute includes acts that disproportionately affect women and girls, including rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, or forced pregnancy. Mainstreaming gender equality through all our work is the only way to achieve the ideals of the responsibility to protect. I'm glad that with the adoption of the latest resolution, which the Czech Republic proudly co-sponsored, responsibility to protect becomes a permanent item on the agenda of the General Assembly. This will provide ample space to discuss these issues and build a common understanding in order to realize our common goal of the world free from atrocities. I thank you.
Thank you. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Simon Coveney, TD, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister of Defence of Ireland.
Many thanks to Costa Rica, Croatia and Denmark for organising today's important event. As we face the challenges of persistent conflict, it's never been more important for us to address the risks and realities of atrocity crimes, including by advancing our implementation of the responsibility to protect. In doing so, it is clear that the only effective approach to this is one that is gender responsive. The inclusion of the concerns of women and their full, equal and meaningful participation and leadership in the design and implementation of early warning systems and mechanisms of accountability, and in peace processes, are essential to the prevention of atrocity crimes. When women are involved in designing and implementing the early warning systems for atrocity risk, they assist in the protection of their communities, using their life experiences, their local knowledge and their influence. Women's input is crucial to creating effective early warning systems, which are vital to national and international prevention work. When women have input into the structures and outcomes of mechanisms of accountability, they can participate in the fight against impunity as survivors and leaders, and importantly, they can have trust in those structures. We must pursue accountability for all atrocity crimes, including conflict-related sexual violence, which disproportionately affects women and girls, and which can constitute an atrocity crime. Effective mechanisms of accountability contribute to prevention and break cycles of violence. When women participate fully and equally in peace processes, those peace processes last. We know from our lived experience of conflict on the island of Ireland that women are powerful agents of change and are instrumental in leading communities away from violence and onto a path towards peace. We must support women peace builders in gaining their rightful seat at the table. An effective and inclusive peace process can put an end to the vulnerability created by persistent conflict. Ireland is fully committed to the women, peace and security agenda, as well as to furthering international cooperation on the responsibility to protect. We welcome this event on the crucial linkage between the two. Thank you very much.
I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Erika Muniz, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Let me start by thanking Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark for organizing this important event. Panama has a proud tradition of supporting multilateral mechanisms. In our worldview, human rights and international law are the most basic tenets of the international order. We're glad to continue being part of the group of friends of responsibility to protect and join our voice in the call against genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and all the crimes against humanity. We encourage collective responsibility among the nations of the international community in addressing and resolving crimes before they escalate in full-blown atrocities. To do so, we must be aware of the full picture. Women and girls are some of the most vulnerable populations in conflict situations. They face gender discrimination as well as physical and sexual violence. It is then crucial to address atrocity prevention through these lenses. We must implement policies that hold perpetrators accountable and give justice to victims. We must also foster the participation of women in resolution conflict. This must be a priority. According to the latest report of the Secretary General, the role of women in peace negotiations is still staggeringly low. We must discuss with, ally and empower women rights advocacy and activists, as well as peace promoters in these processes. Peace building should include women. Maintaining peace should do so too. To ensure a safe and peaceful world for all humanity, let's promote more women voices in international institutions, as well as in law and decision-making circles. Global goals like disarmament, non-proliferation, armed control, and the prevention of crimes should involve everyone. Let's fight for this. Thank you.
Thank you. The next message is from His Excellency Mr. Francisco Bustillo, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uruguay.
Ministers, permanent representatives, colleagues. I am pleased to participate in this ministerial meeting on the responsibility to protect and the role of women and girls in atrocity prevention. At the outset, I would like to thank Costa Rica, Croatia, and the Global Center for the responsibility to protect for co-hosting this timely virtual event on this very important topic. We are facing unprecedented times amidst a deadly global pandemic, unparalleled levels of human displacement, and escalating levels of conflict and violence, as well as violations of international humanitarian law and human rights violations and abuses. Under this complex scenario, Uruguay reaffirms its fully commitment to the responsibility to protect and to improving our collective responses to populations at risk of atrocities. In this regard, Uruguay is fully engaged in multilateral discussions on how to better implement the responsibility to protect, particularly through the group of Friends of the Responsibility to Protect in New York and Geneva, as well as the global network of R2P focal points. Furthermore, Uruguay has been a traditional supporter of the various General Assembly resolutions on responsibility to protect, including the recent resolution adopted in May this year. I would like to offer Uruguay's concrete reflections on the responsibility to protect and the role of women and girls in the atrocity prevention. Women and girls are unlikely affected and targeted in many conflict situations where atrocity crimes are being perpetrated. In all atrocity situations, as well in post-conflict settings, it remains absolutely essential to address women's experiences and highlight women's leadership roles in the prevention of and response to atrocity crimes. It is important for the international community and stakeholders to continue to explore important linkages between the responsibility to protect and other related agents, including peacekeeping, peace building, protection of civilians, women peace and security, and youth peace and security, among others. Relevant United Nations bodies, including United Security Council and Human Rights Council, have essential roles to play in advancing and operationalizing the responsibility to protect and should take advantage of the inputs of the Secretary General's Special Advisors on the prevention of genocide and on the responsibility to protect on situations or issues relevant to their mandates. In promoting and implementing the responsibility to protect as well as in the role of the women and girls in atrocity prevention, Uruguay has been taking several concrete actions. For example, through its contribution to united peacekeeping operations, Uruguay believes that protection of civilian tasks are absolutely essential. In this regard, Uruguay always strives for excellence in the protection of the civilian population, particularly women and girls, who are often the most vulnerable groups. Furthermore, Uruguay believes in the importance of achieving the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women during conflicts and in post-conflict resolution. As a committed country towards the women, peace and security agenda, and the implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1325, Uruguay is taking several steps at the national, regional, and international levels. In relation with the youth peace and security agenda, Uruguay is in the first country to have recently developed and launched a national policy on child protection for Uruguayan peacekeepers deployed in United Nations missions. The national policy reaffirms the importance of providing the best protection possible to girls and boys in conflict situations. To conclude, while we highlight the valuable progress made, we must all recognize that the international community continues to fall short in upholding our collective responsibility to protect, and much more remains to be done. As we pursue and redouble our collective efforts in this regard, You can count on Uruguay as an active, engaged partner in advising and implementing the responsibility to protect. Thank you for all your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Our next message is from His Excellency Lord Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State, Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Affairs, United Kingdom.
Thank you to the Global Centre and excellent speakers for your insightful words. We know that when it comes to negotiating lasting peace and preventing atrocities and conflict, it is essential that women play a pivotal, substantial, and meaningful leadership role. 16 years ago, all UN members confirmed that the responsibility of states to protect their populations from mass atrocities. The Secretary General has recommended prioritizing women's participation in atrocity prevention. I absolutely agree with that. The World Bank reported that gender-equal societies lead to more stable and peaceful states. But the Council on Foreign Relations Research paints a bleak picture of what we face today. Since the Cold War, women have constituted just 13%, 13% of negotiators on average. Just 6% of mediators are female. When we look at the signatories to major peace process, 93% are men. Over the past year alone, we have seen the pandemic throw human rights into reverse, with a disproportionate impact on women and girls that is as predictable as it is disheartening. Knowing what we have learned, it is high time, it is essential to ensure that women have an equal seat at the peacemaking table. We know that empowerment through education is about the smartest investment we can make towards this goal. Girls' education is absolutely key to preventing and resolving conflict and to building back better and more resilient from the pandemic, and indeed for the longer term. And so in May, the UK launched a bold new plan. We set a 5-year target to get 40 million more girls into school around the world and 20 more million reading by the age of 10. As this year's G7 president, we encourage world leaders to adopt those targets at the summit in June. At the Global Education Summit we hosted with Kenya the following month, we pledged £430 million for this vital work. And the UK has led international efforts to tackle the scourge of conflict-related sexual violence. Since launching the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative nearly 10 years ago, we have funded more than 85 projects across 29 countries. We have worked with governments, including Iraq, Colombia, and Nepal, to name but 3, to deliver training on the International Protocol on the documentation and investigation of sexual violence in conflict. And most recently, we are progressing the Murad Code as the global standard for evidence collection. The code upholds survivors' rights as it ends impunity for these heinous crimes. Our support to the Global Survivors Fund last year funded reparations, medical and psychosocial support for over 1,000 survivors in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Sadly, that need continues today, as is evidence in Tigray in Ethiopia and indeed elsewhere. In all, the evidence, though, is crystal clear. It's in front of us. It is substantial. That it is in all our interests that women and girls are not just protected, they are empowered, and more so play a full role, a pivotal role in ending conflict and promoting peace. Though recent months have tested us all, we all know what's required and what we need to do. Women's participation is an essential part, a pivotal part to ending conflict and sustainable peace. Thank you.
The next message is from His Excellency Mr. Luis Almagro, Secretary General, Organization of American States.
Minister, ambassadors, friends, I'm pleased to be here with you today. The principle of the responsibility to protect R2P has been narrow since its beginning. However, as Secretary General Guterres noted in the 2020 report on R2P, the atrocity crimes in the responsibility to protect agenda have a gender perspective and impact, highlighting the direct and unique impact that atrocity crimes have on women and girls. Some 15 years ago, the United Nations Security Council recognized that rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, or constitute acts of genocide, and therefore a key element of the R2P agenda, giving member states a responsibility to prevent these crimes. And as outlined in the R2P doctrine, the best defense against these atrocities is prevention. We must be able to stop these crimes before they happen, and the most effective way to do so is to ensure that countries have the tools and support they need. If we cannot, we must ensure that the states have the support and capacities to combat impunity and seek accountability for these crimes where they are committed. A key way to do so is to empower women as equal voices and equal partners in our decision-making processes. Within the OAS, the Inter-American Commission of Women has been engaged in rethinking the women, peace and security agenda for the reality of the Americas. They are working on an upcoming study that will consider new ways to approach this urgent issue. We must rethink our approaches and find specific indicators and early warning systems that allow us to take more effective preventive action to protect women and girls. And this effort must be led by women and girls. Thank you for your time today. I, along with our special advisor on R2P, look forward to hosting your R2P focal points here in Washington, D.C. as soon as it is once again safe for us all to gather together. We have much work to do. Thank you.
I would now like to give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Helena Koenig, Deputy Secretary General for Economic and Global Issues of European Union. The floor is yours, Madam.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the organizers of this very important event. I'm very honored to be here as the new EU focal point. EU, of course, is a strong supporter of the UN and the special advisors, and of course the global network. I look very much forward to working with all of you in the months and years to come. The resolution of the UNGA adopted last May really provides an opportunity for a deeper discussion of R2P with a focus on early warning, action, and accountability. The special advisors have a very important role to play, and I encourage them to continue to provide early warning assessments and recommendations on prevention. Operationalizing R2P also means that prioritizing prevention, which the UN Secretary General Guterres rightly called as critical as ever, is something that is important. We must strengthen the global protection of human rights, including by supporting national and regional capabilities and capacities, for instance, to combat hate speech. Through the Action Plan for Human Rights and Democracy, the EU works to combat intolerance, harassment, and violence based on ethnic origin, religion, or belief. The EU Framework Decision on Combating Racism and Xenophobia criminalizes incitement to violence, hatred, including online. The COVID pandemic has exacerbated social tensions and institutional weaknesses, all contributing factors to rendering population vulnerable to mass atrocities, with particular hardship experienced by women and girls. We have, during today's event, heard a number of examples from different countries by previous speakers. As we know, gender inequality in itself is linked to further increases of patterns of violence and atrocity crimes. Experts continue to highlight violations, including sexual and gender-based violence. Women and girls are once again paying a high price. We must not let this happen. Women and girls around the world are looking to us for protection, and we must provide it. We therefore need a gender perspective in prevention and protection, and we need to ensure the meaningful participation of women during conflict and post-conflict resolution. Women affected by violent conflict need to be part of peace processes, peace building, and reconstruction. To make sure this happens in practice, the EU has adopted a new strategic approach and action plan to promote the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We aim to integrate a gender perspective and ensure women's participation in all peace and security related contexts. An integrated gender perspective in EU military and civilian missions and operations contributes to increased awareness and signals our determination to promote solutions that benefit all. Our mission supports host states in the inclusion of women in law enforcement and in adopting gender transformative policies and actions. Combating impunity and ensuring accountability are also essential for advancing the R2P agenda. The UN Secretary General's 2020 report identified serious gaps related to atrocity crimes against women and girls. The EU and its member states actively promote the universality of the Rome Statute. We therefore encourage the Security Council to consider the possibility offered by the Rome Statute to refer situations to the prosecutor. Finally, I can only reiterate the EU's commitment to work with the UN and partners around the world to support effective and operational action on R2P, and I look forward to contributing to that in my new role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and welcome Ms. Koenig to the Global Network of R2P Focal Points. I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Robert Fosher, Acting Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations, Department of State from United States.
Thank you very much. The United States wants to thank Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing this important ministerial on the role of women and girls in atrocity prevention. The United States fully supports this initiative and believes that multilateral efforts such as this are the key to making progress. Atrocity prevention and response are critically important across the globe, including in the current crises in Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and Xinjiang, China. These crises require concerted multilateral action and attention, and organizations such as the Global Center are critical to highlighting the risks faced by vulnerable populations, particularly women and girls. The United States is committed to the protection of vulnerable individuals globally. We recognized that the prevention of atrocity is a core national security interest of the United States, and in addition, a core moral responsibility. We also believe that, as former Secretary Clinton said a decade ago, the subjugation of women is a threat to the common security of our world. And when women are involved in peace processes, there is a higher likelihood of durable peace. These truths are readily apparent in atrocity prevention and response contexts. In Afghanistan, we have consistently emphasized the importance of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms for any future government. Any future government in Afghanistan should demonstrate respect for and inclusion of women, girls, and members of ethnic and religious minority groups. In terms of recent reports, the United States condemns in the strongest terms possible reports of Taliban abuses and stands firm with the international community to hold perpetrators of these abuses accountable. For other atrocity response and prevention efforts, the United States is resolutely committed to helping our partners on the ground provide protection, shelter, and vital humanitarian aid to the Afghans. The State Department is focusing a significant amount of energy on the protection of women and girls in the crisis in northern Ethiopia. Since the start of the conflict last year, there have been widespread reports of armed actors committing brutal acts of rape and other sexual violence against civilian populations. This brutality against women and girls is a critical reason why, on September 17, President Biden announced a new executive order for targeted sanctions on the main conflict parties. This new measure is yet another step in our continued push to encourage the parties to stop fighting and meaningfully engage in a negotiated ceasefire process. We also actively support accountability efforts to investigate and address ongoing abuses as a key part of our response in Ethiopia. For the sake of the millions of Ethiopian women and girls paying too much of the cost in this gruesome conflict, the United States cannot and will not relent in encouraging an immediate end to the hostilities. In Xinjiang, China, the PRC government continues to commit crimes against humanity, including enforced sterilization, torture, and imprisonment of Uyghurs. This is part of a larger campaign of human rights abuses against Muslims and members of other ethnic and religious minority groups in China. The United States continues to call for an end to atrocities in Xinjiang, including the use of coercive measures of population control and sexual violence against women. In all of these contexts, we work hand in hand with our multilateral partners. For example, through the International Atrocity Prevention Working Group, we coordinate joint action with states committed to these goals. This working group recently had the pleasure of hosting a fellow speaker on this panel, the Special Advisor Andrito. The prevention of atrocities against women and girls is a priority for Secretary Blinken and all of us at the Department of State. I recently had the opportunity to join Secretary Blinken in launching the 2021 report to Congress on the implementation of the Elie Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act, which recommends advancing gender-sensitive atrocity prevention efforts in support of U.S. Women, Peace, and Security agenda. This month, Secretary Blinken has announced the forthcoming appointment of a senior official responsible for focusing efforts on support for women, girls, and members of minority groups in Afghanistan. The protection of women and girls in these conflicts is a matter that demands our attention and coordinated action now. I look forward to continuing to hear from the other speakers on additional efforts to protect women and ensure their leadership is allowed to resolve these conflicts. Thank you all, and I look forward to the continuing engaging discussion.
Mr. Fosher, thank you for those remarks. And now I would give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Kwei Motun, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Myanmar to the United Nations in New York. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, distinguished participants. It is a great honor for me to participate in this annual Ministerial Meeting, Responsibility to Protect and the Role of Women and Girls in Atrocity Prevention. Such meeting is more critical today than ever, especially for my own country, Myanmar. I wish to thank the governments of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for holding today's meeting, reaffirming our commitment to take serious efforts to address women's experiences and highlight women's leadership roles in atrocity prevention. The primary responsibility for protecting people from heinous atrocity crimes of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity essentially rests with states. The international community, particularly the UN Security Council, has responsibility to help states fulfill this obligation and take collective action in a timely and decisive manner, especially when an authority of power itself is perpetrating those crimes against its own people. The principle of R2P entails both prevention and response. The three pillars of prevention, international assistance, and collective response are mutually reinforcing. Consistent, timely, and unified response from the international community to atrocity crimes immensely contributes to deterring future violations of such crimes. In contrast, failure to decisively respond to atrocity crimes has severely negative impact on promotion of respect for international law, especially international criminal law. Here, I wish to highlight a crucial cross-cutting aspect of our commitment to responsibility to protect and the women, peace and security agenda. The UN Secretary General's 2020 report on the responsibility to protect explored the linkages between upholding R2P and the commitment of states to advancing the women, peace and security agenda, as well as the unique ways in which certain atrocity crimes affect women. From our perspective of national experience, effective implementation of both R2P and the women, peace and security agenda requires ensuring accountability and justice for past and present atrocity crimes, including sexual and gender-based ones. Vulnerable segments of a population, particularly women and girls, are disproportionately affected by conflicts as well as by the lack of accountability. Sexual and gender-based violence is a major affliction to women and girls in atrocity crimes situation. To too many, justice is really served. In Myanmar, it is well documented by the United Nations that sexual and gender-based violence is a hallmark of the military operations. Conflict-related sexual violence is employed by the military as a tactic of war. After the Myanmar military staged an illegal coup on February 1, by detaining democratically elected civilian leaders, women are the forefront of daily protests against the coup, despite imminent risks of future crackdown. Amid the widespread of systematic atrocity committed by the security forces against unarmed civilians across the country, where arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings, torture, and sexual abuses of women and girls in detention. As conflicts now spread across the country, many women in Myanmar, including social and democracy activists, CSO leaders, human rights defenders, and displaced women and girls in ethnic areas, even in urban areas, are at increased risk of all forms of violence from the military. The key enabler of such violation is a culture of impunity enjoined by the military leadership for the past crimes. Currently, the situation in Myanmar demands constant and urgent attention of the Security Council. After the coup, the military has widely destroyed the rule of law, making access to justice impossible. Under the murderous military with lack of any democratic oversight, the perpetrators of serious crimes would go unpunished. This time of extreme difficulty, the international community's commitment to the responsibility to protect the people from mass atrocity crime is still in an urgent need. The people of Myanmar are still hopeful that the commitment be translated into the action in a timely and decisive manner. The National Unity Government is actively seeking accountability and justice for past and present crimes committed by the military. Military have committed such crimes against ethnic and religious minorities, including Rohingya. We all share the concern and are sympathetic to the plight of Rohingya. We are confident that with the end of military junta and the commitment of the National Unity Government, the return of Rohingya people will take place soon, and justice will prevail for all of us, including Rohingya. The NUG is committed to ensuring accountability and ending impunity for those high-ranking officers and their subordinates from the military who committed a grave violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. Accordingly, the NUG lodged a declaration with the registrar of the ICC on 17 July 2021, accepting the court's jurisdiction with respect to the international crimes committed in the territory of Myanmar since July 2002. In addition to ICC, we will continue to work closely with other international justice and accountability mechanisms, including the UN Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar. We continue to urge the international community and UN Security Council to help us end the sickening culture of military impunity in Myanmar. In conclusion, the support of the international community is critical to situations like Myanmar to preserve evidence of violations of atrocity crimes, including sexual violence, and hold the perpetrator accountable. These efforts will undoubtedly be crucial in protection of human rights and establishment of robust domestic justice system in conflict situations that can effectively prevent gender-based discrimination and ensure equal and meaningful participation of women in future atrocity prevention efforts. And thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Francisco Andre, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Portugal.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my colleagues from Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing this ministerial meeting. I would also like to thank the UN Secretary General for his 2020 report on the responsibility to protect. In conflict situations, deliberate attacks against civilians constitute war crimes and, in some cases, crimes against humanity, deserving due accountability. Standing by our obligations under international humanitarian law and human rights law, as well as our common responsibility to protect, we seize this opportunity to reaffirm our commitments to prevent genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. Portugal supports the development of comprehensive strategies for conflict prevention, namely the promotion of sustainable development policies aiming at consolidating peace and protecting civilians, fully respecting the primacy of political dialogue and international law. Prevention is at the core of the responsibility to protect and should continue to be the focus of our collective action. More than reacting to generalized violence and human rights violations, we need, first and foremost, to prevent them from occurring. The responsibility to protect is based on a universalistic understanding of human dignity and human rights. It thus entails a call for action not only to governments and the United Nations system, but also to civil society and the private sector. Last year, we have celebrated the 20th anniversary of the Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, the first resolution to recognize that violence targeting women puts international peace and security at risk. In most communities, women are fundamental drivers of change. It is therefore essential to include women in conflict prevention, management and resolution mechanisms, as well as in the promotion of peace and security. Although women and girls are often the most affected by conflict, they are also relevant actors in their prevention and resolution. Moreover, it is essential to improve the training of military and security forces on the ground in preventing and responding to conflict-related sexual violence. Sexual violence in conflict is a crime perpetrated against women, men, girls, or boys directly or indirectly linked to conflict. However, women and girls are particularly targeted by the use of sexual violence, including as a tactic of war to humiliate, dominate, instill fear, disperse, and or forcibly relocate civilian members of a community or ethnic group, in order to fulfill military, economic, and ideological objectives. Conflict-related sexual violence is always carried out intentionally and has tremendous consequences, since it establishes the domination of the perpetrator over the victim and symbolically the community. Portugal has a holistic approach to the WPS agenda based on the promotion of gender equality, the inclusion of women in conflict prevention, training of armed forces, and the fight against gender and sexual violence. This approach is part of the policies adopted, strategies, and operational planning in defense, foreign policy, development cooperation, security, and justice. Despite the UN Secretary General call for an immediate global ceasefire on March 2020 to focus on the fight against COVID-19, ongoing conflicts continue to harm populations worldwide. In this context, the responsibility to protect, the UN Security Council Resolution 2565 was pivotal in calling for strengthened international cooperation to facilitate equitable and affordable access to COVID-19 vaccines in armed conflict and post-conflict situations and during complex humanitarian emergencies. To conclude, we can only guarantee sustainable peace with an integrated approach based on peace, security, sustainable development, and human rights. And to achieve that goal, we must support governments in their collective responsibility to protect, while backing every effort to conclude peace agreements, mediation processes to promote accountability and to fight impunity. It is crucial to engage in dialogue and political advocacy as we are doing today. We must uphold our commitments and aim for a world where no individual will ever suffer directly or indirectly from atrocities of war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Delphine Briand, Ambassador at Large for Human Rights, Head of the Human Rights Coordination Department, Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear Mr. Vice President, Your Excellencies, dear friends, dear all. I'm grateful to Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect for organizing this meeting and also for this very interesting presentation that we had. Achieving all the goals set forth under the R2P is particularly challenging. Women and girls are uniquely affected and targeted in atrocity situations. It is therefore essential to address the gender dimension of mass atrocities and to adopt gender-responsive protection and reparation measures. France continues to be fully committed to responsibility to protect. Our priority must be to operationalize the political commitments on which the responsibility to protect is based. On the occasion of the UN General Assembly debate on the R2P last May, France and Mexico have issued a joint statement highlighting our joint priorities. One of them was to increase the preventive capacities of regional and sub-regional organizations, which directly relate to the topic of today. There is indeed an evidence. Preventing atrocity crimes must include more efforts on gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. In this respect, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which aims to increase the number of women participating in conflict prevention and resolution and in peace building, constitute a critical instrument. We know that the participation and contribution of women in legal, economic, social, political, security, and cultural fields are drivers for fostering peace processes and stability. Women must be empowered to play a part in all UN member state strategies of prevention, accountability, and reconciliation. And yet, only 92 states adopted at least one national action plan to implement this Women, Peace and Security strategy as encouraged by the UN Security Council resolutions. This is not enough. In addition, internationally, the results are still far from the objectives. As indicated in the last report of the Secretary General on the implementation of the agenda, during the last 25 years, only 2% of mediators, 8% of conflict negotiators were women. And when it comes to fighting terrorism, their voice remained barely audible. Not to mention situations which was mentioned during in this debate and in Afghanistan in particular. To help bridging the gap and contribute to the global effort to achieve the goals of the WVPS agenda, France adopted 3 successive national action plans to implement the agenda. Our commitment does translate into action. The Minkow Fund, created in 2017 and implemented by the French Development Agency, AFD, is a main financial tool, providing a funding facility of 200 million each year between 2017 and 2020. The Minkow Fund contributed to the funding of 75 gender and conflict-related projects in Sahel, Lake Chad, Central African Republic, and the Middle East, for a total amount of 508 million. You know, fostering greater inclusion of women among the stakeholders committed to atrocity prevention, conflict and post-conflict situation management and reconstruction processes, as well as combating impunity and bringing justice into reality are key in this regard. Let me also recall that the Generation Equality Forum, convened by UN Women and co-hosted by France and Mexico, also launched a compact for women, peace and security and humanitarian action, in addition to the 6 action coalitions which were launched in Paris in July 2021, including on gender-based violence and feminist leadership. Let me just finish by commending the role of UN Women, which monitors the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and invite all UN member states to implement all the resolutions adopted by the Security Council. Thank you for bringing this key issue in the front line. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I would now like to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Jukka Brand, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Netherlands to the UN in New York. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Savita, and a big thank you to the Global Center, to the speakers and the co-organizers. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is happy to be participating in this really important event. Women suffer disproportionately from conflict and are disproportionately excluded from its prevention and resolution. This is unfair, it's wasteful, and it is simply not right. Because lasting peace and stability can only be achieved if everyone is involved. The Kingdom of the Netherlands is strongly committed to preventing conflict because it saves lives. That is why we wholeheartedly support full, equal and meaningful participation of women in peace processes and conflict prevention, because it's effective and because it is right. Researchers from the International Peace Institute have found that when women are involved in negotiating a peace agreement, there is a 35% greater chance that it will last at least 15 years. Considering that statistic, it is bordering on criminal that 7 out of 10 peace processes still do not include women. The costs of this are terrible. Excluding women from peace processes means that around the world, conflicts last longer and peace unravels faster. Women are often important leaders within their local communities, and women leaders and women's organizations can play key roles in preventing or resolving conflicts. One of the best contributions, therefore, we can make to conflict prevention and resolution is to help amplify their voices. That is why my country fully supports the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We will continue to use our voice to help strengthen theirs. And we will continue to fight for gender equality and women's empowerment. And we will do everything to put our words into actions. At this General Assembly meeting, we will spend a lot of time talking about Afghanistan. In these discussions, we need to push for an inclusive political settlement that allows for meaningful participation by women in decision-making. This is an essential condition for stability as well as for human dignity. My heart goes out to all Afghan women and girls, because when we're talking about processes and agendas, we are talking about people like them. They are the reason we are here, and we must never forget that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for reminding us for what is at stake. I would now like to give the floor to our next speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Fernando Fernandes Arias, Director General of the United Nations and Human Rights Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Spain would like to thank Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing this event. The responsibility to protect is a core duty of governments, which must act to prevent heinous acts and crimes from taking place. But we must not limit ourselves to pursue signs of violence. A thorough preventive action must be holistic. The respect of human rights and the satisfaction of basic social services and needs are also necessary to avoid and prevent atrocities. And as a consequence, human rights violation and poverty must act as catalysts for the responsibility to protect to take place. This is a clear case where the nexus between the three pillars of the United Nations interact: human rights, development, and peace and security. It is of paramount importance. Civilian population, and especially women and girls, must not be considered only as a passive and potential victims of atrocities, but also as an active actor to avoid and prevent them. We have been focused on how to enhance the safety of women during conflict, and that is a real need. But of course, it is about time that we realize that women are also necessary to avoid conflicts in the first place. We must act before, we must act early, not later. The participation of women in political processes, and especially in mediation and prevention of conflict, is a matter of fair representation, but it is also a guarantee of an effective prevention of atrocities from happening. It is about human dignity, but it is also about political results. The Women, Peace and Security agenda shows the way for women to play a role in prevention. However, we face a huge challenge. The international institutions provide the means and regulations for women to participate in prevention. And this is another example of multilateralism as the main and only way, perhaps, to address universal problems. But all this acquis is difficult to apply in particular situations. The current number of refugees in the world, more than 80 million, which is the highest since the foundation of the United Nations, is proof of this. And we must be aware of these dysfunctionalities, but they are no excuse for inaction. On the contrary. On August 24th, Spain, together with Australia, led a group of more than 70 countries to read a declaration on the occasion of the special session of the Human Rights Council in Geneva on the situation of in Afghanistan. The declaration stated that Afghan women and girls have the right to live in safety, security, and dignity, as in any other part of the world. If women and girls do not enjoy these rights, nobody does. The right to participate in the political process is part of this dignity, and it is a need, as it is the need for preemptive political mediations to be successful. Full enjoyment is necessary for entire civil populations to avoid the scourge of war, as the UN Charter declares in its first sentence. We must continue, all of us, governments, women always included, to fight for peace and security. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks. And now we would go to a message from His Excellency Dr. Stanislav Raskin, State Secretary, Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Slovenia.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today we find ourselves in the midst of a very complex global crisis. At a time when more than 82 million civilians were already displaced by persecution, human rights violations, conflicts, and atrocities, the highest and a very alarming number since 1945, the COVID-19 pandemic has emerged as a new and unprecedented threat to human security. Very many of these victims are vulnerable women and children. In addition, the new coronavirus not only poses grave risk to people's health, but within divided and fragile societies already suffering from identity-based conflicts or persecution, the pandemic significantly increased risk factors that could potentially lead to mass atrocity crimes. Some countries are experiencing increased levels of xenophobia, as well as hate speech and hate crimes directed at specific groups. Several governments have also taken advantage of the pandemic to weaken human rights protections and increase attacks on people who may be vulnerable, including women and children, minorities of many kinds, and people with disabilities. Our commitment to multilateralism and human rights is being tested again. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that our countries, communities, and lives are closely linked. As the world battles COVID-19, we continuously encourage all states and regional organizations to support the UN Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, his appeal to place human rights at the heart of the COVID-19 response, especially to end escalation of violence against women and children. We recall the need to combat violence, including sexual and gender-based violence, which is unfortunately again on the rise in this crisis. The importance of the humanitarian principles and the protection of humanitarian and medical workers should always be respected. It is vitally important to recognize the different roles that women play in preventing and responding to atrocity crimes. Gender-based discrimination and inequality is a significant risk factor for the widespread of systemic violence that constitutes the essence of atrocities crimes. All 4 atrocity crimes and violations associated with the responsibility to protect have a gender impact as genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity can affect men and women and children differently. Despite women's work at the forefront of crisis on the ground, women remain largely underrepresented and underestimated in decision-making and conflict prevention, resolution, and peace-building processes, field missions, and security sectors around the world. This neglect to be changed. This needs to be changed. Women must be included in processes that bring peace and stability in their societies. As states supporting the concept of R2P, we must be resolved to continue working with the international community, civil society, and independent NGOs who are working in the field for the prevention of mass atrocities. And when they happen, it is important to stop these tragic processes as soon as possible. Post-conflict rehabilitation needs to be seriously addressed. We urge the entire international community to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic in practical ways that defend universal human rights, emphasize human solidarity, and uphold our responsibility to protect vulnerable populations from atrocities. Just as the Universal Declaration on Human Rights remains highly relevant despite a failure to prevent continuous abuses of human rights in so many places around the globe, so too does the R2P principle continue to be of fundamental importance. Slovenia has served as a co-facilitator on this topic in negotiation for the World Summit document in 2005 and has always been supportive of this principle. As the current EU presidency, Slovenia continues focusing on the concept of R2P as agreed in the EU recommendations on promoting and operationalizations of the R2P adopted in 2020. Our objective is to contribute to the visibility, development, and implementation of this principle, which still needs recognition in some parts of the world. Slovenia will continue to advocate discussions on responsible sovereignty, the prevention of mass atrocities, and the implementation of the R2P principle in practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. And now the next message is from His Excellency, the next message is from Her Excellency, Ms. Marina Sereni, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy.
Your Excellencies, dear participants, let me thank all the conveners for this important meeting. Italy is strongly in favor of an enhanced interplay between the principle of the responsibility to protect and the women, peace and security agenda. These are challenging times for the protection of civilians, as the COVID-19 outbreak has compounded the suffering of people living in conflict zones. Unfortunately, this pandemic has not proved to be gender neutral, as women and girls are disproportionately affected by humanitarian crises, and they are the main victims of atrocities in these contexts. Indeed, sexual violence represents a major hindrance to women empowerment. No gender equality can be achieved if we do not eradicate this scourge. We need a paradigm shift, aiming to the full establishment of a culture of gender equality which promotes women empowerment and mainstreams a gender perspective on society. We firmly believe that in order to foster the prospects for sustainable peace and reconciliation in crisis contexts, it is key to ensure that all segments of the society, starting from women, are able to get their voices heard. There is plenty of evidence that when women are meaningfully involved, peace agreements are more likely to be reached and more likely to last. In the last few years, Italy has stepped up its effort to mainstream the participation of women in peace processes. We are strongly engaged in consolidating our Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, which responds to the pressing need to foster women's participation in peace processes, mediation efforts, and peace building in the region. Promoting gender equality must go hand in hand with deterring violence. UN peacekeeping operations are tasked with protecting civilians, and women peacekeepers play a key role in this regard. Indeed, they make the difference by accessing communities and creating relationships of trust with the local population, in particular with the most vulnerable categories. Italy firmly supports the responsibility to protect principles and welcome the inclusion of the R2P item in the annual agenda of the General Assembly. Our regular financial support to the UN Office for the Prevention of Genocide and the responsibility to protect is testament of our commitment. Be reassured that you can count on Italy's support. Thank you.
And next we will hear from His Excellency Mr. Luis Enrique Chavez Basagoitia, Ambassador and Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of Peru.
I would like to thank the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, as well as the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect, for organizing this event and for the opportunity to participate. On July 2020, Peru, together with Liechtenstein, Morocco, Qatar, and Switzerland, promoted the adoption of Human Rights Council Resolution 4414 on the 15th anniversary of the responsibility to protect populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. A landmark resolution that recognizes, among others, the important contribution of the UN human rights system in addressing situations in which this type of crimes could be committed. This is a recent token of a long-standing commitment to international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Peru is indeed party to every fundamental instrument on both matters. We therefore recognize in particular the importance of addressing sexual and gender-based violence and other forms of violence against women and girls, and ending impunity by prosecuting those responsible for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Adopting measures to protect women and girls from sexual and gender-based violence in conflict settings should be an integral part of preventing atrocity crimes. Nevertheless, women and girls shall not be seen exclusively as a vulnerable group, but also as part of the prevention and conflict resolution process. The international agenda on women, peace, and security is interconnected. It has to take gender equality, female empowerment, and the participation of women in various decision-making bodies into account at all levels. Let's make women central actors in the international agenda on peace and security, such as peacekeeping operations, and let them play a pivotal role in conflict prevention and its resolution. Thank you.
The next message is from Her Excellency, Ms. Carolina Valdivia Torres, Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs of Chile.
I wish to thank the governments of Costa Rica and Croatia and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for convening this meeting and for the selection of its theme. The link between R2P and the role of women and girls in the prevention of atrocities is in itself of critical importance, and it has been made even more evident in light of recent developments. An initial approach to this link should begin with Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, including SDGs 3, 4, 5, 10, and 16, and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which provide robust international instruments that should guide our efforts. This is particularly the case of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, based on a series of UN Security Council resolutions, which are legally binding to member states in accordance with Article 25 of the UN Charter, and which, first, are based on the pillars of prevention, protection, participation, and peace building and reconstructions. Second, acknowledge that women are more than victims in need of protection in conflict situations, and recognizes their contributions to the maintenance of peace, promoting their participation at all levels of decision-making in conflict prevention, conflict management, and conflict resolution mechanisms, as well as in peace negotiations and in peacekeeping. Third, address the prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence, an issue that also has a central role in R2P. There are a number of actions that can be taken by member states to approach in concrete ways the link between R2P and the role of women in preventing atrocities and the role of women and girls. For example, to adopt the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as a roadmap, giving particular attention to SDG 5 on gender equality and applying a gender perspective approach to every other SDG. Also, to apply the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in every phase of R2P, early warning, prevention and response, integrating a gender perspective and the participation of women in all aspects of decision-making processes, both at the national and international levels. Likewise, to implement the Women, Peace and Security Agenda at the national level through instruments such as the National Action Plans, as well as other target initiatives, including training to armed forces, first responders and public officials, as well as promoting women participation in dispute resolution such as mediation. Also, support women human rights defenders and leaders when they face extreme situations or threats. Another possibility is to support the international criminal justice system, including the International Criminal Court, in the exercise of its functions in accordance with the Rome Statute. As long as there are populations at risk of suffering atrocities, the international community will not be excused of its responsibility to protect. A coordinated and mutually reinforcing approach of the different instruments it has developed will be key to the efforts in this regard. the synergies between R2P, Agenda 2030, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, and the international criminal justice system provide an option which merits further development.
The next message is from Her Excellency Ms. Katerina Levchenko, Government Commissioner for Gender Policy of Ukraine.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to thank the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect and Permanent Missions of Croatia, Costa Rica and Denmark for organizing today's ministerial meeting, which gives us an opportunity to fill the gap in discussion on responsibility to protect since the COVID-19 pandemic and its connection with women, peace and security agenda. Ukraine was a part of a group of states who initiated the inclusion of responsibility to protect item into the agenda of all sessions of the General Assembly and remains among active UN members which promote and support this topic. Excellencies, for more than 7 years, my country is suffering from an armed aggression against Ukraine and the temporary occupation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea by the Russian Federation, with serious humanitarian and gender-related consequences. Due to the aggression, Ukraine has 1.5 million internally displaced persons, 60% of them are women. Unprotected population in the temporarily occupied territories face intimidations, detention and ill treatment, physical and sexual violence, as well as strong gender stereotypes that limit women's capacity to make choices about their lives. Oppressive policies against Crimean Tatar women, in particular activists, human rights defenders, relatives of political hostages, constitute another dire consequences of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Regardless of the ongoing aggression, my government last year adopted the second National Action Plan to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It aims to ensure post-conflict reconstruction and transitional justice, combating gender-based and conflict-related sexual violence. It focuses on achieving greater participation of women in decision-making, in particular in national security and defense, peace building, and conflict resolution. Just recently, a draft law which ensures the equal participation of women in all measures of transitional justice, as well as guarantees a state response to sexual violence in armed conflict, was registered in the parliament. Ukraine will also continue its efforts aimed at promotion of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda implementation within the United Nations. To conclude, let me emphasize that to achieve full and meaningful participation of women during the conflict and in post-conflict resolution, we need to draw clear links between responsibility to protect and work on women, peace and security, ensure consistency with other international commitments and priorities, and incorporating all of the lessons learned about conflict and prevention. Thank you.
I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gazmand Perdue, Director of the Security Council Department, Ministry for Foreign Affairs and Europe of Albania. I think we might be experiencing some technical issues. Just give us a couple of minutes. Please be patient. We are going to move on next to our representative from Bangladesh, His Excellency Mr. Muhammad Shahriar Alam, MP, Honorable State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm delivering the statement on behalf of His Excellency Muhammad Shahriar Alam MP, Honorable State Minister for Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, who had to leave to attend another important meeting, in-person meeting at the UN. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers for convening this ministerial meeting on the responsibility to protect. The theme of this year's ministerial meeting, which focuses on the role of women and girls in atrocity prevention, is very significant. We fully recognize the mutually reinforcing roles of the R2P and Women, Peace and Security agenda in preventing mass atrocities. The conviction that women and girls have critical roles in atrocity prevention is rooted in our own struggle for independence, which left around 200,000 of our women and girls victims of sexual violence. After the war, we not only recognized their contribution and prioritized their rehabilitation, but also ensured their meaningful participation in our post-war reconstruction and nation-building efforts. The National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which we adopted in 2018, recognizes and pledges to enhance further women's role in crisis and disaster management and prevent terrorism and violent extremism. Excellencies, as a non-permanent member of the Security Council in 2000, Bangladesh spearheaded diplomatic efforts to adopt the historic Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. As the leading peacekeeping nation, our peacekeepers contribute directly to implementing the WPS agenda through the protection of civilians mandate, including through actively engaging local communities, especially the local women and girls, in prevention efforts. Our participation in peacekeeping in general and the involvement of our female peacekeepers in particular are patently linked to and stem from the lessons that we learned during our War of Liberation, and from our conviction that women have indispensable roles in peace-building efforts. Excellencies, our commitment to this principle was also exemplified when we opened our doors to nearly 1 million forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals who fled mass atrocities in Myanmar and subjected to ethnic cleansing in everyone's watch. It is well documented that in Myanmar, sexual violence was used extensively as a weapon of war on these women and girls, and most of them continue to carry the horrors they faced in their homeland. Excellencies, while we have made strides in advancing the WPS agenda, formidable challenges remain on many fronts. As a way forward, allow me to share a few thoughts. First, the WPS agenda needs to be fully integrated with the UN's prevention work. Empowering the national and local stakeholders, especially those led by women and youth, can bring transformational changes in addressing deeply rooted social and racial intolerance that lead to mass atrocities. Second, in the post-conflict and humanitarian settings, efforts must be made to ensure a gender-responsive approach, recognizing women's increased role in recovery and rebuilding efforts. Third, ensuring justice and accountability for conflict-related sexual violence is an essential precondition for reconciliation in a conflict-affected country. Fourth, education is the most effective tool in countering the fundamentalist and stereotypical mindset of the terrorist and the parties to the conflict who use sexual violence as a weapon of war. Awareness building on international humanitarian law and other norms against sexual violence need to be prioritized irrespective of the situation. Finally, we must address all forms of discrimination and other barriers that hold back women from actively contributing to peace processes. The UN and the international partners need to support governments in their national efforts to advance the cause of women. Excellencies, since its birth, Bangladesh has placed the highest trust and confidence in the power of multilateralism. Bangladesh will continue to support the UN's pivotal role in preventing atrocities, protecting human rights, and sustaining peace, in particular through full and effective implementation of the WPS agenda. I thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Anjum, for those very thoughtful remarks, and thank you for joining us. Now, I would like to pass on the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ricardo Bucalandro, Director of International Organization, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship of Argentina. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Croatia, Costa Rica, and Denmark for organizing this 13th Ministerial Meeting on the responsibility to protect. I would also like to highlight the work of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect to promote R2P and deepen global engagement. Of course, much remains to be done in terms of prevention of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. In the current context, even if COVID-19 cannot cause mass atrocities on its own, it has unfortunately led to increased stigma, xenophobia, racism, and discrimination. It has deepened divisions within communities, and it has exacerbated inequalities. COVID-19 has left already vulnerable and marginalized communities at a greater risk, especially women and girls. Therefore, it is worth discussing the principle and its challenges. We welcome this debate, where member states have the possibility to enrich the universal human rights system, contributing to strengthen the prevention pillar, which is crucial for the human rights perspective. In that regard, it is essential to support the mechanisms that are fundamental for the implementation of the principle, such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, its mechanisms and special procedures, and the Office of Prevention of Genocide and the Responsibility to Protect. These mechanisms contribute to eradicate serious human rights violations, which can often be potential early indicators of mass atrocities. In Argentina, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is guided by the implementation of UN Security Council. The recommendations made by CEDAW and the Human Rights Council through the Universal Periodic Review, the recommendations made by the Special Rapporteurs on Violence against Women and on Human Trafficking, especially women and girls, and the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women and Girls. It is essential to increase the presence of women in peacekeeping missions, humanitarian assistance missions, and in peace building and negotiation processes. We should promote gender mainstreaming in all peace building activities, including disarmament, demobilization, reintegration, and humanitarian assistance. Moreover, the human rights of women and girls in all their diversity, and LGBTIQ people in countries in conflict and post-conflict, including refugee camps and displaced persons, must be protected. These rights must also be protected in adverse situations resulting from the pandemic and post-pandemic framework, such as poverty and hunger, gender and sexual violence, in order to promote an environment of safety and well-being. Argentina believes that the best way of protection is prevention. The responsibility to protect and the women, peace and security agendas have transformed the discourse on human rights and strengthened the maintenance of international peace and security, contributing to create new frameworks aimed at protecting vulnerable populations from heinous crimes. This debate is crucial to renew the commitments of member states to both agendas, and thus achieve a holistic approach to prevention, accountability, and reconciliation, with full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in conflicts and post-conflicts. I appreciate and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your remarks, and thank you so much for recognizing the work of the Global Center. I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gazman Turtiu, Director of the Security Council Department, Ministry for Foreign Affairs in Europe of Albania. Sir, the floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much. I would like to start by thanking the governments of Costa Rica, of Croatia, and of Denmark for hosting this meeting, and to appreciate the great work done so far by the Global Center for Responsibility to Protect. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in many conflict situations, in atrocity situations, as well as in post-conflict settings, women and girls are mostly affected and targeted. It remains essential to highlight leadership roles in the prevention and response to atrocity crimes. One of the previous speakers mentioned that situation, so it is even more important to include them in the measures and actions that we take to our groups, including women and children from conflict, persecution, and atrocities. But the information and reports we receive are disturbing. To this meeting is important for member states to recommit and enforce
So would you like to close off your camera so that we can see you better or hear you better? Okay, unfortunately, I think that, these are sort of the challenges of our times. I think that we always have challenges of different kinds. So we will move on to our next speaker. And the next speaker is Her Excellency, Ms. Bridget Stevens, United Nations Director, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Belgium. Madam, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good morning. Allow me to start by warmly thanking the co-hosts, as well as the Center for the Right to Protection for the organization of this important event. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is a priority for Belgium and is very closely linked to the right to protect, as the panelists have clearly illustrated and as was highlighted in the Secretary General's 2020 report. The inclusion of a gender perspective leads to a better understanding of the causes and dynamics of atrocity crimes, but also helps states and other relevant actors to better meet their responsibility to protect. Allow me to elaborate on some of the themes that are of special importance to Belgium. My country is strongly committed to combating impunity and ensuring accountability for atrocity crimes, including sexual and gender-based violence. This is essential to R2P. However, survivors' access to justice is often insufficient in conflict areas due to inadequate normative frameworks, the limited capacity of rule of law institutions, or a lack of trust in state actors who may themselves be perpetrators. Belgium supports and commends in this regard the work of the UN team of experts on rule of law and sexual violence in conflict. Belgium also puts a special emphasis on the needs of girls and young women, in line with the priority we give to children's rights, women's rights, and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. The political momentum created by last May's adoption of the procedural R2P resolution must lead to the actual implementation of the R2P principle, also in terms of preventive actions. The many early warning mechanisms that are in place need to integrate a clear gender focus, and they need to lead to action at the earliest signs that atrocities are about to be committed. The United Nations Security Council has a particular responsibility in this regard, but all of us member states can contribute. We can implement small concrete steps on the ground while focusing on prevention. And we can do this, for instance, by gathering accurate factual information on existing threats, as well as on past atrocity crimes in the affected regions. Belgium calls upon all member states to increase their support for and implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda and integrate its principles across the atrocity prevention agenda. The UN and its member states must take action to uphold our responsibility to protect, prevent atrocity crimes, including sexual and gender-based violence, protect women and enhance their role in atrocity prevention and response, including as mediators and negotiators. Finally, I would like to seize the opportunity to explicitly thank Mrs. Karen Smith, who took on the role of Special Advisor on R2P during the past 2.5 years, for her enormous work and unflagging commitment to implement and promote R2P. Belgium is looking forward to the appointment of a new Special Advisor who will continue the excellent work on atrocity prevention, as well as the cooperation with the Special Advisor on genocide prevention. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your remarks. And now I will give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ashnul Habib, Director of Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs, Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Indonesia. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, my delegation commends the convening of this timely and pertinent event by the permanent missions of Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and the Global Center for the Protection. We also thank the ministers for Foreign Affairs for their opening statements, respectively. The protection of civilians in armed conflict has been an integral part of Indonesia's constitutional mandate and foreign policy, and sets the tone for the theme of our Security Council presidency back in 2019. The role of women and girls on the promotion of R2P, particularly in the prevention aspect, is always an important subject to Indonesia. We are of the view that R2P and the WPS agenda are naturally connected. In this regard, the unique connection between women as targets of atrocities and women as agents of peace has been the focus of discussion in the UN for many years. In this regard, civilian protection policies and activities should be based on the needs of affected communities. Local leaders and community members, especially women, must become part of the design and its implementation. Indeed, we have seen the increase of women's role in the prevention of and response to conflict settings, including through the presence of female peace negotiators, women peacekeepers, political representatives, and humanitarian actors. Nevertheless, peace process at the high level is still male-dominated. Based on data from UN Women between 1992 to 2019, women only constitute 13% of negotiators and 6% of mediators. 7 out of 10 peace processes also do not involve women. Realizing such challenges, in 2019, Indonesia has initiated the Southeast Asian Network of Women Peace Negotiators and Mediators, followed by the convening of the Regional Forum on Women Peace Negotiators and Mediators in June 2021. These initiatives were aimed at advancing the inclusion and meaningful participation of women as mediators and negotiators in all phases of conflict resolution and peace processes. Further, it also reflects a strong effort from the region to complement the global alliance of regional women mediator networks. We believe that the increased participation of women in peace process will increase the likelihood of sustained peace, contributed to longer, more resilient peace. As our foreign minister stated, I quote, "Investing in women equals investing in peace." Finally, rest assured of Indonesia's full commitment in contributing to the global efforts to the protection of life. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your remarks, sir. And now I will pass on the floor to His Excellency Mr. Yusuf bin Sultan Yusuf Laram, Director of the Department of International Organizations, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Qatar. Sir, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, Adotis, I would like to thank the governments of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark, and the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for organizing this meeting, which takes place in the midst of the increasing need for stronger multilateral international action in various fields, in addition to protected conflicts and displacement. The outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of the responsibility to protect, as vulnerable populations around the world are exposed to heat risk of serious human rights violations and atrocity crimes. This reality warrants more determined and consistent measures by the international community to fulfill its responsibility to protect civilians, especially vulnerable groups. Preventing mass atrocities remains an individual and collective responsibility that anchored in the Charter of the United Nations and international humanitarian law. We have a responsibility to protect populations that are vulnerable to atrocity crimes and to hold the perpetrators of mass atrocities accountable. We reiterate that the Security Council has a responsibility to take collective action to prevent and halt atrocity crimes, and it should refrain from the use of the veto power in such cases. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the state of Qatar's commitment to the responsibility to protect is in line with its belief in international cooperation to establish collective security, respect for international law, and its well-established policy to promote international peace and security. In keeping with this commitment, the state of Qatar is committed to enhance R2P as the co-chair for a period of 3 years and active member of the group of friends of the responsibility to protect. As part of its support for the role of women and girls in achieving peace, the state of Qatar has consistently promoted and implemented the Women, Peace and Security agenda since its adoption, based on its commitment to the principle of gender equality and the promotion and the protection of women's rights. The state of Qatar has spared no efforts to support the implementation of the Secretary General's strategy for gender parity. To the end, the state of Qatar has been taken to involve women in all peace processes in which the state of Qatar plays a mediation role. We believe that the involvement of women contributes to the success of the mediation processes, and that ensuring the rights of women and girls, the advancement of women and their active participation in society are an essential component of any agreements and activities related to peace and the rule of law. In light of the fact that it is crucial for women, girls, and youth to get a quality education in order to contribute to creating robust societies capable of building and maintaining peace, the state of Qatar has played a leading role at the international level to provide education, especially in conflict zones and post-conflict societies. In this regard, I recall the pledge of the state of Qatar to provide a quality education to 1 million girls by 2021 that was announced by His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar, during his participation in the 2018 Leadership Dialogue on the implementation of the Charlie Boy Declaration on Equality Education for Girls and Women in Developing Countries. In conclusion, the State of Qatar will continue its efforts and partnership with the international community to prevent atrocities, promote the principle of the responsibility to protect, and engage all stakeholders to achieve peace, especially women, girls, and youth. I thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Yusuf Diallo, Ambassador and Director of International Organizations and Global Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Senegal. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Her Excellency, Madam Aissata Tall Sall, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Senegalese abroad, I want to start by welcoming this ministerial meeting on a timely issue, the responsibility to protect. My special thanks to the Executive Director of the International Center on the Responsibility to Protect and to Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark for co-hosting this very important event. Ladies and gentlemen, the unanimous adoption of the 2005 summit outcome document demonstrates the international community's commitment to protecting civilian population from mass atrocities, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, as well as ethnic cleansing. Women, as we know, and girls are undoubtedly the most vulnerable to those crimes. I therefore welcome this year's theme as it helps us address the most heinous crimes, including rape, human trafficking, and forced prostitution and in conflict zones, in line with landmark UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Against this backdrop, it is our responsibility to prioritize prevention in order to better protect the population, particularly in this COVID pandemic. We therefore need to use the responsibility to protect as a tool against mass atrocities by helping member states to meet their obligations under international law and human rights. In this regard, we call for a common ground around this concept in order to make it work for us all. That is why we believe that the respect of human rights, particularly those of women and girls, as well as political and economic governance, remain the main safeguards against mass atrocities. The disproportionate impact of these atrocities on women and girls should always be underscored, including in the Sahel region. We should also pay due attention to strengthening the United Nations early warning system and to a greater international cooperation in order to detect threats that could lead to such atrocities. Ladies and gentlemen, as a major peacekeeping contributor, Senegal has implemented a military gender strategy in line with the UN strategy in order to enhance the participation of women in peacekeeping operations. We all know how effective women are on the field. Let us therefore enhance their participation in conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution. Furthermore, we welcome the adoption of the resolution on the responsibility to protect and the prevention of genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. By co-sponsoring this resolution, Senegal has demonstrated its unwavering commitment to a peaceful world, including by lending its full support to the concept of R2P. I thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for reiterating Senegal's commitment to the responsibility to protect. We very much welcome it. And I would now like to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Omar Hilale, Ambassador and Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Morocco to the United Nations in New York. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Savita. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today's meeting is timely and relevant as the need to rebuild and recover better is pressing. In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us that there can be no substitute for multilateralism, neither a substitute for the United Nations. Today, we have no choice but to strengthen our global organization, especially in the field of international peace and security, in which the UN has unparalleled legitimacy. Therefore, it's only natural that the primary institution pillar for the revival of the responsibility to protect agenda will remain at the United Nations. Since 2005, and after the publication of the first report of the Secretary General on the implementation of R2P in 2009, this concept has taken new dimension in the light of the recent development of the world marked by emergence of new threats and actors. Indeed, the COVID-19 pandemic offers an opportunity to review and adopt multilateralism, the role of the UN, and the concept of R2P. Going forward with R2P requires an agenda for prevention. Non-member states or region can consider itself immune to the risk of atrocity crimes. Hence, the importance of building a solid institutional architecture at the national level that not only upholds the rule of law, democracy, and human rights, but also places gender equality at the heart of its national design. The world is experiencing growing violence, mass displacement, humanitarian disasters, recruitment of children, soldiers, by armed groups, as well as the devastating repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, which have shattering consequences on women and girls, and that have unfortunately hampered progress toward achieving peace and security, reconciliation, and stability for all. Yet, it has been Morocco's firm conviction that commitment to gender equality is the only pathway for lasting resilience to global crisis. As His Majesty Mohammed VI reaffirmed in many occasions, and I quote, "The affirmation of principles of equality between women and men is the adequate pathway to achieve prosperity that benefits all," end of quote. The present critical juncture imposes on us the need to renew our commitment to the Security Council Resolution 1325, which was the first resolution to recognize the extent of the underrepresentation of women in conflict prevention, conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and peace-building processes. It is in this spirit that Morocco has developed National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security in collaboration with UN Women. The Moroccan plan is based on three major pillars: mediation and peacekeeping, prevention and economic empowerment. Above all, the plan is designated on a result-oriented approach that associates all relevant stakeholders. Accordingly, and based on its unwavering commitment to actively contribute to the preservation of international peace and security, Morocco has launched several initiatives in its regional and international environment aimed at strengthening the capacities of women in these above-mentioned fields. One, the deployment of female officers within the Moroccan contingents deployed in MINUSCA, and UNMIS. Two, the launch of MedMed initiative aimed at strengthening the capacity of women mediators in the Mediterranean basin. And three, the active participation in the African Women Network for conflict prevention and mediation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is no better investment for international community than in national resilience. In Morocco's assessment and own experience, national human rights institutions, human rights education, and the religious civil society actors have played and continue to play crucial role in fighting hate speech and preventing violence, extremism, two important potential enablers that can lead to mass atrocities. Morocco presented to the General Assembly in June 2019 a landmark resolution 73/328 entitled Promoting Interreligious and Intercultural Dialogue and Tolerance in Countering Hate Speech. The resolution was adopted by consensus and co-sponsored by 90 UN member states. Along with the same lines, the General Assembly has adopted just last July unanimously the resolution 75/309 presented by Morocco on the fight against hate speech, and which proclaimed for the first time in the history of the United Nations, June 18th of each year as the International Day Against Hate Speech. This is another illustration of Morocco's status as bridge builder of tolerance, dialogue, and coexistence between religions, cultures, and nations. To conclude, the Kingdom of Morocco remains convinced that prevention must be holistic so as it tackles all root causes and challenges, mainly poverty, inequalities, and human rights violations that are at the heart of the grievances that fuel mass atrocities. I thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing some of the successes experienced in Morocco through the work of your government. I would now like to move to the final speaker of the day, His Excellency Mr. Richard Arbiter, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative, Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations in New York. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Our thanks as well to Costa Rica, Croatia, Denmark, and the Global Center. Today is a national federal election in Canada, which is why I'm here meeting with you. But I wanted to say that while atrocity prevention should be apolitical, it's not. And we're so heartened and wanted to express our appreciation to all of the ministers and all of the senior officials from all over the world and from the Organization of American States and the European Union for expressing their political support to this important agenda. Now, I wish that political support was sufficient, but it's not. And so let me also extend our appreciation to the Office of the Special Advisor, to her specifically and to her team for ensuring that whether it's the work on hate speech, the work on outreach to religious communities, or most importantly, that the work on the analytical framework to identify risks of atrocities is informed by gender considerations. This is something that we're trying to learn to do better ourselves in Canada, and we look forward to continuing to work with her office and work with that team to discover how we can be better at our jobs, because we're all shareholders in this initiatives. We have a gender pledge at our mission where we are mandated to look at every single item through that lens. Because we're also interested in the effectiveness, as the special advisor pointed out, and we are absolutely convinced that is that lens that makes us more effective in our work. That lens is important for the systemic response, but we're also aware that it takes individuals. And so let me, frankly, as the son and grandson of Holocaust survivors, let me pay tribute, Savita, to you and to your team and to Simon Adams before you for all of the work that the individuals across the world and here in New York on your team do to make this agenda first and at the forefront of High Level Week year after year, but also every week of the year. Because unfortunately, it's not about September, it's about serving the communities, serving not only the women and girls and men and boys, but serving those who need the input from individuals like yourself. So with that, thank you once again. I wish you all the best moving forward.
Thank you for those very encouraging words, and we are always grateful for all the support, the political support that Canada provides this issue, as well as the issue of WPS. So with that, I would like to close the meeting with a final video message from our outgoing Executive Director, Dr. Simon Adams.
Thank you for giving me the honor of making some concluding comments at this 13th Ministerial Meeting on R2P. I thank all the ministers for their thoughtful interventions, especially the co-host ministers of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark. I also want to thank my friends, the UN Special Advisor for the Prevention of Genocide, and Ms. Wawei Nu for their speeches, and then also my dear friend Savita Ponde for moderating. Today's ministerial meeting was an opportunity for UN member states to recommit to the mutually reinforcing agendas of R2P and WPS and discuss how to enhance our understanding of the gendered dynamics of atrocity crimes. But now I want to broaden the focus, if I may. This is my 11th and final ministerial meeting that I have had the honor of attending as the Executive Director of the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect. During the last decade, I have seen countless ministers come and go as governments change, but international law and global norms and principles are not transitory. They endure. Nevertheless, we are living through what my colleague David Miliband from the International Rescue Committee has described as a new age of impunity. There are now 82.4 million people around the world displaced by persecution, conflict, and atrocities, the largest number since the Second World War. When I started at the Global Center in 2011, there were 42.5 million people displaced. So the scale of human suffering has grown exponentially despite our best efforts. In the 16 years since it was first adopted at the 2005 UN World Summit, R2P has been invoked in more than 60 UN Human Rights Council resolutions and 96 Security Council resolutions, including authorizing action to halt atrocities in Côte d'Ivoire, in northern Iraq. International political pressure also helped prevent the worst from happening in places like Kenya and Burundi. Meanwhile, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in South Sudan and Central African Republic, blue-helmeted UN peacekeepers have upheld the international community's responsibility to protect civilians. But R2P, like all human rights norms, has also provoked controversy with the 2011 intervention in Libya and the failure to act with regard to Syria, causing bitter divisions. The international community has also failed to halt atrocities in Cameroon, Venezuela, Myanmar, and Yemen. But at the end of the day, R2P has saved lives and is still the only internationally agreed upon principle that can mobilize effective multilateral action. The truth is that meaningful change will continue to come in increments, and success will require intestinal fortitude and political will. It will stem from brave people like Gambia's Justice Minister, Abubakar Tambadou, who was unprepared to accept the inaction of the Security Council in relation to the Rohingya genocide, and took it upon himself to take Myanmar to the International Court of Justice for breaching their obligations under the Genocide Convention. He is just one example, but around the world there are many more human rights defenders, civil servants, and yes, government ministers who have resisted the idea that they are just one voice and cannot make a difference. Because from Myanmar to Ethiopia to the Uyghur mass detention camps in China, those who commit atrocities would like nothing better than to return to a world of complacency and lowest common denominator diplomacy. 3 years ago, I was invited to address a UN Security Council Arias formula meeting on the prevention of atrocity crimes. I ended by directly addressing council members with the following words, which seem as good as any upon which to end this 13th ministerial meeting, because they are relevant to each and every one of us, regardless of high office. I said, those to whom mass atrocities are not just words, but real acts that pose a direct threat to them, their families, and their communities are looking to this council and to all of us. Some of you may be shy of the words, but those facing death need you to defend human rights and uphold your responsibility to protect. And they need you to do so without exception and with consistency and courage. That is how we get real change. That is how we bend the arc of history away from inaction and injustice and back towards hope and humanity. Thank you.
I still haven't mastered the mute and unmute button, but thank you, Simon, for those really inspiring words. And with that, I call this meeting to an end. I would like to thank each and every speaker. You waited very patiently for your turn, so thank you very much for that. And I would also give my deepest appreciation to our co-hosts, the governments of Costa Rica, Croatia, and Denmark. I hope that the political rhetoric and the political dialogue that we've had here today actually has some impact on the ground and leads to some commitments from states in actually protecting women and girls in Afghanistan, Myanmar, Tigray. Unfortunately, the list is unending, but I hope that this leads to some action on the ground. So thank you very much. And I would also like to thank my team, which is through amazing challenges put up this seamless event. So I would particularly like to thank Juliet Pava, Jahan Pitalwala, and Christine Caldera from the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect for pulling off this amazing 3-hour event. So have a great day and have a great General Assembly week. And I hope that this week of us meeting together through Zoom or in person leads to real action for people on the ground. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.